He was a name whispered in hushed tones, a specter haunting the darkest corners of America. Israel Keyes was not just a serial killer, he was the embodiment of calculated evil, a predator who moved through life cloaked in normalcy. Unlike many of his depraved brethren, Keyes reveled in the absence of a signature. He was a chameleon, shifting his methods with each kill, leaving investigators grasping at shadows. Keyes meticulously crafted his persona, constructing a facade of normalcy so convincing that it would take years for the truth to unravel. He was a construction worker, a family man, a face lost in the crowd, but behind the mask of ordinariness lurked a predator of unparalleled cunning, a master manipulator who turned the mundane into the macabre. His crimes spanned a continent, leaving a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. He toyed with authorities, relishing the fear he instilled with each carefully planned attack. Keyes was a nightmare made flesh, a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters often wear the most ordinary faces. And the most terrifying aspect of all, we may never know the true extent of his crimes. The seeds of darkness often find fertile ground in the shadows of a troubled childhood. In the case of Israel Keyes, these seeds were planted early and nurtured by an environment that was both isolating and oppressive. His story is a chilling reminder of how a toxic upbringing can shape a person's destiny in the most horrifying ways. For Israel Keyes, those shadows stretched long and deep, shrouding his formative years in a veil of isolation and despair. The rural home where he grew up was not just physically isolated but emotionally barren, a place where the seeds of his dark future were sown. Born into a deeply religious family on the fringes of society, Keyes grew up estranged from the normalcy most children take for granted. His family adhered to extremist beliefs that further alienated them from the outside world, creating an insular environment where young Israel had little exposure to anything beyond their rigid doctrines. His family, steeped in extremist beliefs, lived a life of seclusion, rejecting the modern world and its temptations. This isolation was not just physical but also ideological, as they shunned any influence that did not align with their narrow worldview. This created a breeding ground for the dark thoughts that would later consume Keyes. Young Israel, starved for connection and starved for something he couldn't name, found solace in the company of violence. The lack of emotional support and the oppressive atmosphere at home left him searching for an outlet, and unfortunately he found it in the most disturbing of ways. Animals became his first victims, their silent suffering a testament to the darkness festering within. This early cruelty was a clear warning sign, a red flag that something was deeply wrong. Yet, in the isolation of his upbringing, these signs went unnoticed, or worse, were ignored. As Keyes grew older, his fascination with death morphed into something more sinister. The violent tendencies that began with animals soon escalated, as his mind became a dark playground for increasingly twisted fantasies. These were not just idle thoughts but detailed plans that he would later act upon. He began to fantasize about inflicting pain on humans, his mind conjuring up scenarios of control and domination. These fantasies were fueled by the isolation and the extremist beliefs that had been ingrained in him from a young age. They provided a twisted sense of purpose and power that he craved. These dark fantasies, fueled by isolation and a warped sense of reality, festered within him, slowly twisting him into the monster he would become. The lack of any positive influence or intervention allowed these thoughts to grow unchecked, turning his mind into a breeding ground for evil. The warning signs were there, whispers of the depravity to come. These whispers were not just in his actions but also in his demeanor, the way he interacted with the world around him. Yet, in the echo chamber of his isolated upbringing, these signs were drowned out by the overwhelming silence. But in the isolation of his upbringing, those whispers went unheard, lost in the echo chamber of extremism and neglect. The environment that should have nurtured him instead became a crucible for his darkest impulses, shaping him into the person he would become. The monster was growing stronger, and soon, the shadows would no longer contain him. The isolation and neglect that had defined his early years had done their work, and the world would soon come to know the true extent of the darkness that had been festering within him all along. The United States Army, a crucible where ordinary men and women are forged into weapons of war. It is a place where discipline, strategy, and the art of combat are drilled into recruits, transforming them into soldiers capable of facing the harshest realities of battle. For many, it is a path to honor and service, a way to protect and defend their nation. But for some, the skills learned in the military can be twisted into something far more sinister. For Israel Keyes, it was an opportunity to hone his already present darkness, to refine his capacity for violence into a lethal art form. The structure and rigor of military life provided him with the perfect environment to cultivate his malevolent tendencies. The Army's training programs, designed to create disciplined and efficient soldiers, inadvertently became the breeding ground for his dark ambitions. He enlisted in 1998, his young mind already a breeding ground for sinister desires. The induction ceremony marked the beginning of a transformation, one that would see him evolve from a troubled youth into a calculated predator. The camaraderie and brotherhood of the military masked the internal storm brewing within him, a storm that would eventually unleash itself upon the world. Military life, with its emphasis on discipline, strategy, and the cold, hard realities of combat, provided the perfect training ground for a budding serial killer. The rigorous training exercises, the relentless drills, and the constant focus on precision and efficiency all played a part in shaping Keyes into a formidable force. He absorbed every lesson, every tactic, every strategy, molding them to fit his own dark purposes. Keyes excelled in his training, his superiors noting his discipline and proficiency in weaponry. He was a quick learner, mastering the use of various firearms and other weapons with ease. His performance reviews were glowing, filled with commendations for his skill and dedication. But beneath the surface, his true intentions remained hidden, masked by the veneer of a model soldier. He was a model soldier, his outward demeanor masking the darkness that churned within. His fellow soldiers saw him as disciplined and reliable, a man who could be counted on in the heat of battle. But they were unaware of the sinister thoughts that occupied his mind, the plans he was formulating, the skills he was honing for a purpose far removed from the ideals of honor and duty. But beneath the surface, Keyes was learning more than just how to kill efficiently. He was learning how to disappear. The military's emphasis on stealth and evasion tactics became a crucial part of his education. He practiced blending into his surroundings, moving silently and unseen, mastering the art of becoming a ghost. These skills would later prove invaluable as he embarked on his reign of terror. He studied evasion tactics, camouflage, and the art of blending in, skills that would later serve him all too well in his reign of terror. The ability to move undetected, to strike without warning and then vanish without a trace became second nature to him. The military had provided him with the tools he needed to become a ghost, a phantom moving unseen and undetected through the world. The military had unwittingly provided him with the tools he needed to become a ghost, a phantom moving unseen and undetected through the world. His training in stealth and evasion was thorough, and he took to it with a disturbing enthusiasm. Every lesson, every drill, every exercise was another step towards perfecting his ability to disappear, to become invisible in plain sight. By the time Keyes left the Army in 2001, he was no longer the troubled young man who had enlisted. The years of training and discipline had transformed him into something far more dangerous. He had become a weapon, honed to a razor's edge, his mind a repository of deadly skills and knowledge. The military had given him the tools, and now he was ready to use them. He was a weapon, honed to a razor's edge, his mind a repository of deadly skills and knowledge. The discipline and training he had received in the Army had shaped him into a formidable force, one that was now unleashed upon the world. The monster was now fully formed, a predator with the skills of a soldier and the cunning of a killer. The monster was now fully formed, unleashed upon the world with a soldier's discipline and a predator's cunning. The skills he had acquired in the military, the discipline, the strategy, the ability to move unseen, all combined to make him a deadly force. The world was now his hunting ground, and he was ready to unleash his reign of terror. Israel Keyes was a chilling anomaly in the annals of criminal psychology, a meticulously organized killer who thrived on chaos. His name sends shivers down the spines of those who study the dark recesses of the human mind. Unlike many serial killers who follow a discernible pattern, Keyes was a master of unpredictability. He was a ghost, a phantom who moved through the shadows, leaving behind a trail of terror and confusion. His methods were as enigmatic as they were horrifying, making him one of the most perplexing figures in the history of crime. He meticulously planned his crimes, but his methods were a study in calculated randomness, designed to confound even the most seasoned investigators. Keyes would spend months, sometimes even years, preparing for a single act of violence. He would bury kill kits containing weapons, money, and other tools in various locations across the country, ensuring he was always ready to strike. This level of preparation was unprecedented, and it allowed him to operate with a terrifying level of efficiency. Keyes meticulously avoided establishing a pattern. He understood that predictability was the enemy of the serial killer. By varying his methods, locations, and victims, he made it nearly impossible for law enforcement to connect his crimes. This deliberate randomness was his greatest weapon, and he wielded it with deadly precision. He would travel vast distances, crossing state lines with ease, to select his victims. Keyes was a nomad, constantly on the move, never staying in one place long enough to raise suspicion. He would drive for hours, sometimes days, to find the perfect target. This constant movement made it incredibly difficult for authorities to track him, and it added to the sense of fear and uncertainty that surrounded his crimes. His targets were chosen seemingly at random, their only commonality being their vulnerability. Keyes had no specific type. He would prey on anyone who crossed his path at the wrong time. This lack of a clear victim profile made it even harder for investigators to predict his next move. He was an equal opportunity predator, and his victims ranged from young to old, male to female, making everyone a potential target. He would stalk them for weeks, learning their routines, exploiting their weaknesses, before finally making his move. Keyes was patient, methodical, and relentless. He would watch his victims from afar, studying their habits, their schedules, and their vulnerabilities. This meticulous surveillance allowed him to strike with devastating effectiveness, catching his victims completely off guard. His crimes were as varied as his victims. From abductions to home invasions, from strangulation to shooting, Keyes employed a wide range of methods to carry out his horrific acts. This variety further complicated the efforts of law enforcement, as there were no consistent patterns to follow. Each crime was a unique event, a standalone tragedy that left investigators grasping at straws. He was a master of disguise, able to blend into any environment and assume any persona. Keyes could be anyone, anywhere. He would change his appearance, his mannerisms, and even his voice to avoid detection. This chameleon-like ability made him incredibly difficult to identify and apprehend. He could disappear into a crowd, vanish into the night, and re-emerge as someone entirely different. He would abduct his victims from their homes, from parking lots, from the street, leaving no trace of his presence. Keyes was a ghost, slipping in and out of his victims' lives without leaving a single clue behind. His abductions were swift, silent, and utterly terrifying. He would strike when his victims least expected it, taking them from the safety of their everyday environments and plunging them into a nightmare. He would torture them, kill them, and dispose of their bodies hundreds of miles apart, erasing his steps with chilling efficiency. Keyes took great care to ensure that his crimes would never be traced back to him. He would transport his victims' bodies to remote locations, burying them in unmarked graves or disposing of them in ways that made recovery nearly impossible. This meticulous attention to detail allowed him to evade capture for years. Keyes was a master of deception, a puppeteer pulling the strings of chaos. He reveled in the confusion and fear he created, manipulating the world around him to suit his dark desires. His ability to control the narrative, to stay one step ahead of those who sought to stop him, was a testament to his cunning and intelligence. He understood that predictability bred capture, and he refused to allow himself to be boxed in by routine. Keyes was always evolving, always adapting. He knew that the moment he became predictable, he would be vulnerable. This constant state of flux kept him ahead of the authorities and allowed him to continue his reign of terror. His crimes were a macabre symphony of randomness, each note carefully chosen to create a chilling masterpiece of terror. Israel Keyes was not just a killer, he was an artist of death, crafting each act of violence with a precision and care that was as horrifying as it was impressive. His legacy is one of fear, confusion, and a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. The night of November 13, 1974, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Amityville, Long Island. The streets were calm, the houses stood silent, and the air carried a sense of peace that only a small, close-knit community could offer. It was a night like countless others, where families felt safe within the walls of their homes, and the troubles of the world seemed far away. A light breeze rustled through the trees, whispering secrets to the night. The leaves danced gently, casting fleeting shadows on the ground as if nature itself was trying to communicate a warning that went unheard. Families settled in for the night, unaware of the darkness creeping towards 112 Ocean Avenue. Children were tucked into bed, parents relaxed in their living rooms, and the hum of everyday life filled the air. It was a scene of normalcy, of routine, of the mundane comforts that make up the fabric of suburban life. Inside the large Dutch colonial house, however, a storm was brewing. This was no ordinary storm, but one that would leave a permanent scar on the community. The house, with its distinctive gambrel roof and iconic windows, stood as a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy. It wasn't a storm of wind and rain, but one of madness and violence. Shadows moved inside the house, flickering lights hinted at the chaos within. The tranquility of the night was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. By morning, the quaint facade of the DeFeo family home would be shattered, revealing a scene of unimaginable horror. 6 lives brutally taken. The sun rose to illuminate a house that had become a crime scene, a place where innocence was lost, and nightmares became reality. One chilling question left hanging in the air: what happened inside 112 Ocean Avenue? The number 112, once just an address, now carried a weight of dread and mystery. It became a symbol of the inexplicable, a question mark that loomed over the town. Some say evil permeates the very foundation of that house. They speak of a malevolent force, an evil presence that drove the events of that night. The house, with its dark history, became a focal point for tales of the supernatural, of forces beyond human understanding. Others claim it was a tragic case of a family torn apart by their own demons. The DeFeo family, once seemingly perfect, had hidden cracks that widened into chasms of despair and violence. The fragmented family photo, a poignant reminder of what once was, now lay shattered, much like the lives it depicted. Tonight, we delve into the horrifying events of that fateful night. We examine the evidence, we explore the theories, the flashing lights of the police cars, the hushed whispers of the neighbors, all paint a picture of a community grappling with the unthinkable. We ask the question that has haunted this small town for decades: was it just a man, or was it something more sinister at play? The full moon cast an eerie glow on the house, as if nature itself was spotlighting the mystery that lay within. Get ready, because tonight, we're diving headfirst into the chilling truth behind the Amityville murders. We will peel back the layers of myth and reality to uncover the true story of what happened on that ordinary night that turned into an unthinkable horror. The DeFeo family seemed on the surface like any other. Patriarch Ronald DeFeo Sr. ruled with an iron fist. His wife Louise tried to keep the peace. They had 5 children: Ronald Jr., Butch, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John. However, behind the facade of normalcy, darkness festered. Ronald Sr. was known for his explosive temper and abusive behavior. The children lived in fear. Whispers of family secrets and simmering resentment followed them like shadows. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue, with its grand exterior and spacious rooms, should have been a haven. Instead, it became a pressure cooker. The family's dysfunction intensified within its walls. Neighbors reported shouting matches, doors slamming. Some even claimed to see fleeting figures in the windows, shadows moving just out of sight. Whether these were genuine paranormal occurrences or simply the product of an overactive imagination, one thing was clear: the DeFeo family harbored secrets, and those secrets would soon paint the walls of their home with blood. Around 3:15 a.m., the silence of the night was shattered by the roar of a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. The tranquility of the suburban neighborhood was abruptly replaced by a sense of dread and confusion. The stillness of the night, which had been a comforting blanket for the residents, was now a haunting reminder of the violence that had just occurred. 6 shots rang out, each one a nail in the coffin of the DeFeo family's fate. The echoes of the gunfire reverberated through the quiet streets, a grim symphony that marked the end of innocence for this peaceful community. Neighbors, startled from their sleep, would later recount the chilling sounds that pierced the night, unaware of the horror unfolding just a few houses away. Upstairs in their beds, Ronald Sr., Louise, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John were systematically executed. The family, who had once shared laughter and love within these walls, now lay lifeless, victims of an unimaginable act of violence. Each shot was a calculated move, a deliberate act that left no room for mercy or hesitation. Each family member was found lying face down, their dreams extinguished in a torrent of violence. The sight was a macabre tableau, a stark contrast to the warmth and safety that a home is supposed to provide. The positions of their bodies suggested a sudden, overwhelming force, one that left them no chance to react or escape. But amidst the carnage, there was an eerie absence, a struggle, a cry for help, any sign that the victims had tried to fight back. It was as if they had been caught in a nightmare from which they could not wake. The silence of their final moments was deafening, a void that spoke volumes about the terror they must have felt. It was as if they had accepted their gruesome fate. The lack of defensive wounds or signs of a struggle puzzled investigators, leading them to question the circumstances of the murders. How could an entire family be so easily subdued? What kind of fear or coercion had kept them from fighting back? The killer, as we know, was 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., a young man with a troubled past. Butch had a history of erratic behavior and conflicts with his family. Yet, no one could have predicted the extent of his rage or the cold-blooded nature of his actions that night. He would later claim that voices, demonic whispers urging him on, had driven him to commit the horrific act. These alleged voices, he said, had tormented him, pushing him to the brink of sanity. Whether these claims were a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable or a genuine glimpse into his disturbed mind, they added a chilling layer to an already horrifying story. But the calculated precision of the murders, the lack of any struggle, painted a different picture. It suggested a level of premeditation and control that was at odds with the idea of a man driven to madness by unseen forces. The methodical nature of the killings indicated a mind that was disturbingly clear and focused on its deadly mission. The scene suggested a cold-blooded execution, not a fit of madness. The evidence pointed to a deliberate, calculated act of violence, one that required planning and a chilling detachment from the humanity of his victims. This was not the work of a man in the throes of a psychotic break, but rather someone who had made a conscious decision to end the lives of those closest to him. As investigators combed through the blood-soaked bedrooms, they were left with a chilling question. What could drive a son to annihilate his entire family in such a calculated, merciless manner? The answers, if they existed, were buried deep within the twisted psyche of Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., a young man whose actions would forever haunt the quiet streets of this once peaceful neighborhood. The sun rose on a scene of unimaginable horror. The quiet suburban neighborhood, usually a picture of tranquility, was now the epicenter of a gruesome crime that would shock the nation. The DeFeo family home, once a symbol of the American dream, had become a house of nightmares. The early morning light did little to dispel the darkness that had settled over the town. Butch DeFeo Jr., seemingly unfazed by the carnage he had orchestrated, went about his day with a chilling normalcy. His demeanor was disturbingly calm, as if the events of the previous night had no bearing on his conscience. He walked through the suburban streets, his expression blank, his mind seemingly elsewhere. To the casual observer, he was just another young man starting his day. He clocked in for work, acted surprised by the news of his family's demise, and even joined the throng of onlookers gathering at the crime scene. His performance was almost theatrical, a macabre play where he was both the actor and the audience. He mingled with the crowd, his face a mask of feigned shock and sorrow. But beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. His performance, however, was unconvincing. Those who knew him sensed something was off. His reactions were too calculated, his emotions too rehearsed. The unease in his eyes betrayed the facade he was trying so hard to maintain. It was as if he was playing a role he hadn't fully prepared for, and the cracks were beginning to show. His stories were inconsistent, riddled with holes and contradictions. Each time he recounted the events, the details changed. One moment he was a helpless witness, the next a reluctant participant. The authorities, trained to detect deception, quickly picked up on the discrepancies. His narrative was like a poorly woven tapestry, threads of truth and lies tangled together in a confusing mess. The police, their suspicions piqued by his erratic behavior, began to suspect that Butch knew more than he was letting on. They observed him closely, noting every nervous twitch, every hesitant pause. The more he spoke, the deeper he seemed to dig himself into a hole. His attempts to mislead only served to tighten the net around him. As the day wore on, Butch's facade crumbled. The weight of his lies became too much to bear. His confident exterior gave way to visible distress. He was no longer the composed young man who had started the day. The reality of his actions was beginning to catch up with him, and it showed in every strained expression, every anxious glance. He changed his story multiple times, first claiming to have witnessed the murders, then confessing to killing his father in self-defense before finally admitting to the murders of his entire family. Each version of events differed wildly from the last, adding another layer to the already convoluted case. His shifting narratives were a desperate attempt to find a version that would absolve him, but instead, they only served to incriminate him further. Each version of events differed wildly from the last, adding another layer to the already convoluted case. The investigators were left sifting through a web of deceit, trying to piece together the truth from the fragments of Butch's conflicting accounts. His agitation grew with each retelling, the pressure of maintaining his lies becoming increasingly unbearable. With each lie, each inconsistency, Butch tightened the noose around his own neck. His desperation was palpable, his attempts to control the narrative slipping through his fingers like sand. The more he tried to manipulate the story, the more entangled he became in his own web of deceit. The police watched as he unraveled, their suspicions turning into certainty. The police, armed with a mountain of evidence and a confession riddled with inconsistencies, were certain. Butch DeFeo Jr. was their man. They had the physical evidence, the witness statements, and now, a series of confessions that, despite their contradictions, pointed to one undeniable truth. Butch was guilty. The case against him was solidifying, the pieces falling into place. But what they couldn't understand was the why. What could drive a man to commit such an unspeakable act against his own family? The motive remained elusive, a dark shadow over the case. The investigators were left grappling with the psychological puzzle, trying to comprehend the mind of a killer. The why was a question that gnawed at them, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. What drove him to commit such an act of unspeakable evil? Was it a moment of madness, a lifetime of resentment, or something even darker? The answers were not forthcoming, and the more they delved into Butch's past, the more questions they uncovered. The house, now a symbol of horror, stood as a silent witness to the events that had transpired within its walls. That question, like a specter, would continue to haunt the investigation. The search for answers would lead them down dark paths, exploring the depths of human nature and the capacity for evil. The case of Butch DeFeo Jr. was not just a story of a crime, but a journey into the heart of darkness, a reminder of the thin line between sanity and madness. Dennis Rader. To the unsuspecting residents of Wichita, Kansas, he was a man of normalcy, a face in the crowd. He blended seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life, never drawing undue attention to himself. He was a husband, a father, a devout churchgoer. His family saw him as a loving and responsible man, someone who provided for them and participated in their lives with genuine interest. A respected member of the community, he attended local events, shook hands with neighbors, and was always ready to lend a helping hand. His presence was comforting, his demeanor unassuming. He was, in the truest sense of the word, invisible. No one suspected. He moved through life like a shadow, never giving anyone a reason to look twice. No one knew the darkness that lurked beneath this carefully constructed facade of ordinariness. Behind the smiles and the friendly gestures was a man with a sinister secret. Rader's double life was a masterpiece of deception. He had perfected the art of appearing normal while hiding his true nature. It was a chilling duality that he maintained with meticulous care. He lived amongst his unsuspecting neighbors, all the while harboring a horrifying secret. His actions were calculated, his movements deliberate, ensuring that his true self remained hidden. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator masquerading as a pillar of the community. His ability to deceive was his greatest weapon, allowing him to operate undetected for years. This jarring contrast, this terrifying duality, is what makes the case of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, so deeply unsettling. The man who seemed so ordinary was capable of unimaginable horrors. Rader's outward life was meticulously crafted. Every detail was designed to reinforce the image of a normal, upstanding citizen. He was methodical in his approach, leaving nothing to chance. He was a Boy Scout leader, guiding young minds. He took on roles that would further cement his image as a trustworthy and reliable individual, someone who could be counted on. He held a job as a compliance officer, enforcing rules and regulations. His position gave him authority and respect, adding another layer to his carefully constructed persona. He was an active member of his church, a man of faith in the eyes of his congregation. His participation in religious activities further solidified his image as a moral and upright individual. It was a life lived in the open, a life of manufactured normalcy. He engaged in everyday activities, blending in with his surroundings, never giving anyone a reason to doubt his integrity. He was hiding in plain sight, a master manipulator who used the mundane to shield himself from suspicion. His ability to appear ordinary was his greatest disguise. His story is a stark reminder that evil often lurks in the most unexpected places, concealed by a veneer of normalcy that can be as convincing as it is terrifying. The case of Dennis Rader forces us to confront the unsettling reality that sometimes the most dangerous individuals are the ones who seem the most ordinary. The acronym BTK, chilling in its simplicity, stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. This was not merely a descriptor of Dennis Rader's modus operandi, it was his self-proclaimed title, a chilling moniker he used to brand his heinous acts. The BTK signature, a stark reflection of his sadistic desires, cast a pall over Wichita for decades. Rader's crimes were as calculated as they were cruel. He meticulously stalked his victims, learning their routines, exploiting their vulnerabilities. His methods were deliberate, almost ritualistic. He would bind their hands and feet, often using household items found at the scene. Then, the torture would begin. The torture was never swift, never merciful. It was a slow, agonizing process designed to inflict maximum pain and terror. Rader reveled in the suffering of his victims, drawing out their agony as a form of perverse entertainment. His need for control, for power, was paramount. Finally, when his gruesome desires were satiated, he would kill. Each murder was as cold and calculated as the last, carried out with an eerie detachment that spoke to the depths of his depravity. The BTK signature was a calling card of terror, a grim reminder to the people of Wichita that a monster walked among them. The path to becoming a monster is often paved with disturbing milestones, red flags that in retrospect seem to scream a warning. These early signs are often subtle, almost imperceptible, but they are there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be noticed. Dennis Rader's childhood, while seemingly normal on the surface, was marked by a number of troubling signs that hinted at the darkness festering within. His family and friends might have seen him as just another boy, but there were moments that stood out, moments that, in hindsight, were clear indicators of the path he was on. Even as a child, there was a cruelty to Rader that set him apart. He was not like other children. There was a coldness in his eyes, a detachment that was unsettling. He seemed to take pleasure in the suffering of others, a trait that would only grow stronger as he aged. Animals, often seen as innocent and vulnerable, became the target of his sadistic curiosity. He would trap stray animals, subjecting them to unimaginable torture. These acts of cruelty weren't mere boyhood indiscretions, they were chilling foreshadowing of the monster he would become. As Rader grew older, his disturbing behavior escalated. He developed a fetish for women's underwear, stealing undergarments from neighbors and even his own family members. This behavior, often dismissed as harmless or even humorous, was a clear indication of his distorted views on sexuality and his growing obsession with control and domination. There were other signs too, an obsession with knots and ligatures, a fascination with true crime and detective magazines. These seemingly disparate interests, when viewed through the lens of his later crimes, formed a disturbing pattern, a mosaic of warning signs that tragically went unnoticed or ignored. The seeds of darkness sown in childhood had taken root, slowly twisting him into the monster known as BTK. His actions were not random, they were the result of a deeply ingrained pathology, a darkness that had been growing within him for years. As he entered his teenage years, Rader's behavior became more erratic and more dangerous. He began to stalk women, watching them from the shadows, fantasizing about the control he could exert over them. His fantasies grew darker, more violent, and he began to plan how he could turn these fantasies into reality. His fetish for women's underwear was not just about the thrill of stealing, it was about power and control. He would wear the stolen garments, imagining himself as his victims, feeling the power he held over them. This behavior was a clear sign of his growing obsession with domination and control. His obsession with knots and ligatures was another troubling sign. He would spend hours practicing different types of knots, perfecting his technique. This was not just a hobby, it was a preparation for the crimes he would later commit. His fascination with true crime and detective magazines was also a clear indicator of his dark interests. He would read about other criminals, learning from their mistakes, planning how he could avoid capture. These interests, when viewed in isolation, might seem harmless, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. They were the building blocks of the monster he would become, the early warning signs that, if noticed, might have prevented the horrors he would later commit. The seeds of darkness sown in childhood had taken root, slowly twisting him into the monster known as BTK. His actions were not random, they were the result of a deeply ingrained pathology, a darkness that had been growing within him for years. These seemingly disparate interests, when viewed through the lens of his later crimes, formed a disturbing pattern, a mosaic of warning signs that tragically, when unnoticed, were ignored. The seeds of darkness sown in childhood had taken root, slowly twisting him into the monster known as BTK. The seeds of darkness, sown in childhood, had taken root, slowly twisting him into the monster known as BTK. The reign of terror inflicted upon Wichita by Dennis Rader, the self-proclaimed BTK, spanned over a decade, leaving a trail of heartbreak and fear in its wake. His moniker, BTK, stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, a chilling summary of his modus operandi. Rader's ability to blend into the community, living a seemingly normal life, only added to the horror. He was a family man, a church leader, and a compliance officer, hiding his monstrous alter ego behind a mask of normalcy. His victims, often chosen at random, were united in their horrifying fate at the hands of a cunning and merciless killer. The randomness of his attacks meant that no one felt safe. People began to take extra precautions, locking their doors and windows, and looking over their shoulders, fearing they might be next. The Otero family, Joseph, Julie, Josephine, and Joseph Jr., became Rader's first victims in 1974. The brutality of their murders was unprecedented in Wichita. Joseph and Julie were found bound and strangled, while their children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., met similarly horrific fates. The community was left in shock, unable to comprehend the savagery of the crime. Their murders, as shocking as they were brutal, sent shockwaves through Wichita. The media coverage was extensive, with headlines screaming the gruesome details, further instilling fear in the hearts of the residents. The police were under immense pressure to catch the perpetrator, but Rader was meticulous, leaving behind little evidence. The meticulous manner in which their lives were taken, the chilling discovery of their bound bodies, marked the beginning of a nightmare for the city. Rader's methodical approach to his crimes made him a formidable adversary for law enforcement. He took his time, ensuring that every detail was perfect, every knot tied just right, every scene left in a state of eerie calm. 4 years later, in 1978, Rader claimed the life of Shirley Vian. Her murder was as calculated and cold-blooded as the Otero family's. Rader had a pattern, a ritual that he followed, and Shirley Vian was unfortunate enough to become part of it. Found bound and strangled in her own home, her murder further fueled the growing sense of panic in Wichita. The community's fear was palpable, with residents feeling the weight of the invisible threat that loomed over them. The police were working tirelessly, but Rader's ability to evade capture only added to the city's anxiety. The city was on edge, haunted by the knowledge that a predator lurked among them. Neighborhood watch groups were formed, and people began to take their safety into their own hands. The sense of community was strong, but so was the fear that anyone could be the next victim. Rader's reign of terror continued with the murders of Nancy Fox in 1977, a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her life was cut short in a manner that had become all too familiar to the residents of Wichita. Maureen Hedge in 1985, a beloved neighbor and friend, whose death left a void in her community. Her murder was a stark reminder that Rader could strike at any time, and no one was safe. And Vicki Wagerly in 1986, a young mother whose life was brutally taken, leaving her family and friends devastated. Each of these murders was a calculated act of violence, designed to instill fear and assert Rader's control over the city. Each victim, each crime scene, bore the chilling hallmarks of the BTK signature. The letters he sent to the police and media, taunting them with his crimes, only added to the terror. He enjoyed the game, the cat-and-mouse chase, and the power he held over the city. The city of Wichita held its breath, living in the shadow of a killer who seemingly vanished into thin air after each gruesome act. The fear was ever present, a dark cloud that hung over the city, as residents waited for the next strike, hoping and praying that it would never. New Orleans, 1918. Jazz filled the air, but something sinister lurked in the shadows. The French Quarter, with its vibrant life, became a place of fear. Someone was stalking the night. People called him the Axeman. The city was already on edge. World War I raged across the ocean. Now, a different kind of terror gripped the city. Residents feared what darkness would bring. The police were baffled. Who was the Axeman, and what did he want? May 23, 1918. It was a quiet night in New Orleans, the kind of night where the city seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets were eerily silent. Joseph Maggio, a grocer, slept soundly beside his wife Catherine. They had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. A noise awoke him. It was faint but persistent, like a whisper in the dark. He got out of bed to investigate, thinking it might be a stray animal or a loose shutter. He never found the source of the sound. Instead, he found the Axeman, a shadowy figure lurking in the doorway, holding an axe that glinted menacingly in the dim light. Catherine awoke to a chilling thud and her husband's screams. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of the chaos around her. She rushed to help him, her mind filled with dread. The sight that greeted her was horrific, something out of a nightmare. Joseph lay in a pool of blood. His head was almost severed, a gruesome testament to the brutality of the attack. Catherine, too, was attacked. She barely survived, her body and spirit scarred by the ordeal. The Axeman had left his mark. This was no ordinary burglar. The weapon he used and the ferocity of the attack spoke of something far more sinister. This was something far more sinister. The Axeman would go on to become one of the most feared figures in New Orleans history, a specter of terror that haunted the city for years to come. The Axeman didn't stop with the Maggios. His brutal spree continued, leaving a trail of blood and fear in his wake. Each attack was more gruesome than the last, sending shockwaves through the community. His reign of terror continued. The newspapers were filled with horrifying accounts of his crimes, and the public's anxiety grew with each passing day. He always targeted Italian grocers. These small business owners were the backbone of their communities, and their murders left a void that was deeply felt. He used an axe, always aiming for the head. The brutality of his method was shocking, and it left a lasting impression on everyone who heard about it. The city was on high alert. People were terrified. They locked their doors and windows, fearing that they might be the next victims of this relentless killer. The police worked tirelessly. They followed every lead, no matter how small, hoping to catch the Axeman before he could strike again. But their efforts seemed in vain. But the Axeman was always one step ahead. He moved through the shadows, evading capture and leaving the city in a state of constant dread. Theories spread like wildfire. Was it a deranged lunatic? People speculated endlessly, trying to make sense of the senseless violence. A scorned lover? Or something even more sinister? The mystery only deepened as the attacks continued, and the fear grew. Fear permeated the city as thick as the humid New Orleans air. The Axeman's presence was felt everywhere, and no one knew when or where he would strike next. Then, the Axeman did something unexpected. In a move that shocked the entire city, he reached out directly to the public. He sent a letter to the newspaper, a chilling message that would be printed for all to see. In this letter, he claimed responsibility for the brutal murders that had terrorized the city. He promised more to come, instilling fear and uncertainty in the hearts of the residents. But there was a catch, a sinister twist that no one saw coming. He offered a chilling deal, one that would force the city to make a choice. The Axeman declared his love for jazz music, an unexpected passion for such a ruthless killer. He promised to spare any house where jazz was playing, a bizarre and terrifying ultimatum. On the night of March 19, 1919, every venue in New Orleans was packed with people. Jazz music filled the streets, a desperate plea for mercy from a city gripped by fear. The city held its breath, waiting to see if the Axeman would keep it. Delphi, Indiana. A town where time seemed to drift along the currents of Deer Creek. A place where life unfolded at a gentler pace, cradled by the embrace of the Hoosier heartland. But this serenity hid a darkness, a secret waiting to surface. At the edge of town stood the Monon High Bridge, a sentinel of iron and wood. It was a place of simple beauty, where the whispers of the wind danced through the trees, and the sun painted golden hues across the creek below. For generations, the bridge had been a cherished landmark, a place for quiet contemplation and carefree laughter. But on February 13, 2017, the bridge bore silent witness to an unspeakable horror that would forever stain its weathered planks. Liberty Libby German, 14, was a bright spark, a talented musician with a contagious laugh. Abigail Abby Williams, 13, was known for her kindness and infectious smile. They were the best of friends, two souls who found solace and adventure in each other's company. Life in Delphi revolved around school, family, and the simple pleasures of small-town life. Libby and Abby were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and the unbreakable bond of teenage friendship. They were a familiar sight around Delphi, their laughter echoing through the park, their bikes a blur of color against the backdrop of the Indiana sky. February 13, 2017, dawned bright and crisp, a snow makeup day offering a break from the classroom. Libby's older sister dropped the girls off at the Monon High Bridge trailhead for an afternoon of adventure. 1:35 p.m. The girls, full of life and the spirit of exploration, disappeared into the woods, their laughter swallowed by the vast expanse of the Indiana wilderness. It was the last time they were seen alive. 2:07 p.m. A chilling clue emerged from the digital ether. A Snapchat image sent from Libby's phone captured Abby walking tentatively across the Monon High Bridge. The image, seemingly innocuous, would later become a haunting piece of evidence. 5:30 p.m. As dusk settled over Delphi, casting long shadows across the land, a chilling realization gripped the community. Libby and Abby were missing. The disappearance of Libby and Abby sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of Delphi. The unthinkable had happened. Their faces, frozen in time on missing person posters, became a haunting symbol of innocence lost. The search was immediate and relentless. Hundreds of volunteers, their faces etched with worry and determination, combed through the woods, their desperate calls echoing through the trees. First responders, their faces grim, worked tirelessly, following every lead, chasing every shadow. But as hours turned into an agonizing night, a sense of dread began to creep in. The following day, Valentine's Day, brought with it a discovery that shattered the town's innocence. Less than a mile from the Monon High Bridge, in a rugged patch of terrain only accessible by foot, a search party stumbled upon the unthinkable. The bodies of Libby and Abby, their young lives cut tragically short. The idyllic landscape of Delphi was now a crime scene, the tranquility shattered by the weight of the tragedy. The investigation intensified, a desperate race against time to find the person responsible for this heinous act. Among Libby's belongings, investigators discovered a crucial piece of evidence: her mobile phone. It contained a haunting video, a chilling glimpse into the girl's final moments. The video showed a grainy figure, a man dressed in jeans and a blue jacket, walking towards them on the bridge. His voice, a raspy whisper, sent chills down the spines of investigators as he uttered the words, "Guys, down the hill." The video and audio from Libby's phone became the focal point of the investigation. The grainy image of the man on the bridge, his face obscured by shadow, became seared into the public's consciousness. He became known as the Bridge Guy, a phantom haunting the dreams of a community desperate for answers. 2 distinct police sketches were released, each offering a slightly different interpretation of the man's features. Tips poured in, each one meticulously investigated, but the case remained unsolved. Years passed, seasons changed, but the memory of Libby and Abby and the mystery of their killer lingered like a ghost in the Indiana air. October 2022, a name surfaced from the sea of frustration and despair: Richard Allen, a familiar face in Delphi, someone who had blended into the fabric of the town. He had even been interviewed by investigators in the early days of the investigation, but was not initially considered a primary suspect. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, a mix of relief and disbelief. Could this unassuming man, a neighbor, a fellow resident of their quiet town, be the monster they had been searching for all these years? As details of the investigation unfurled, a more disturbing picture began to emerge. Allegations of a possible larger network, whispers of ritualistic elements, and claims of multiple suspects added another layer of complexity to an already perplexing case. The long-awaited trial of Richard Allen began in October 2022. The eyes of the nation turned to a small courtroom in Allen County, where the fate of a community's quest for justice hung in the balance. The trial was moved to Carroll County, and the prosecution presented its case, relying heavily on the video and audio evidence from Libby's phone. The defense, however, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, and that the investigation had been flawed from the beginning. As the trial progressed, more questions than answers seemed to arise. Why were Libby and Abby targeted? What was the motive behind their murders? Were there other individuals involved? The Delphi murders serve as a stark reminder that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected of places, shattering the tranquility of small-town life. The quest for justice for Libby and Abby continues, a testament to the resilience of a community determined to honor their memory. The case remains shrouded in mystery, a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence and the enduring power of hope in the face of tragedy. The bridge to tragedy still stands, a silent sentinel overlooking the creek, forever linked to the memory of two young lives cut short. The air was crisp and cool, pine trees whispered secrets in the mountain breeze. Keddie Resort, nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California, promised tranquility. But on the night of April 11, 1981, evil descended upon Cabin 28. Peace shattered, replaced by a scene of unimaginable violence. The Sharp family, seeking refuge from city life, had no idea of the horror that awaited. Glenna Sue Sharp, a loving mother of 5, was there with her children. John, 15, playful and full of life. Sheila, 14, on the cusp of womanhood. Tina, just a child at 12, with a bright smile that could light up a room. Joining them were John's friend, 12-year-old Dana Wingate, and Greg, Sue's 15-year-old son from a previous relationship. The children played board games, their laughter echoing through the cabin. Sue chatted with her neighbor, unaware that darkness was closing in. Hours later, their peaceful retreat would transform into a scene of unspeakable horror. The very walls would cry out in silent testimony to the brutality inflicted that night. The following morning, the sun cast long shadows over the resort. A horrifying discovery awaited inside Cabin 28. Sue, John, and Dana lay lifeless, bound with electrical wire and medical tape. The murder weapons, a hammer and 2 knives, were left behind, a chilling testament to the killer's rage. Sue had fought bravely, her body bearing the brunt of the attack. John and Dana, bound and defenseless, had met the same gruesome fate. The brutality of the scene sent shockwaves through the small community. Who could commit such a heinous act, and why? Adding to the horror, 12-year-old Tina was missing. Had she been spared, or was she taken by the killer? The question hung heavy in the air, a terrifying mystery that would haunt investigators for years to come. The search for Tina became intertwined with the desperate hunt for the Keddie Cabin murderer. While the exact details of that fateful night remain shrouded in mystery, investigators pieced together a chilling timeline. Sometime after 10 p.m., when Sue last spoke to her neighbor, evil entered Cabin 28. The killer, or killers, subdued Sue, John, and Dana, binding them with meticulous care. The absence of defensive wounds on John and Dana suggests they were overpowered quickly, possibly while sleeping. The sheer brutality inflicted upon Sue, however, indicates a personal vendetta, a rage that knew no bounds. Was she the intended target all along? Amidst the chaos, Tina vanished. Did she witness the murders, her abductor whisking her away to silence her, or was she targeted for a more sinister purpose? The mystery of Tina's disappearance deepened the horror of the Keddie Cabin murders, adding a chilling layer to an already incomprehensible crime. The following morning, Sheila Sharp awoke to a strange silence. The usual sounds of her family were absent. Stepping into the living room, she stumbled upon a scene that would forever scar her young mind. Her mother, brother, and Dana lay dead, their bodies a testament to the horrors that unfolded just hours earlier. Overcome with terror, Sheila fled the cabin, seeking help from a neighbor. The authorities arrived to find a scene of unimaginable brutality. The murder weapons were left behind, as if placed deliberately. A bloody footprint, too small to belong to any of the victims, hinted at the presence of an unknown assailant. The tranquility of Keddie Resort was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of a triple homicide. Whispers of the murders spread like wildfire, leaving the community reeling in shock and disbelief. Who could commit such a horrific act, and why target the Sharp family? The search for answers had begun, but the path to justice would prove long and arduous. Section 5, a labyrinth of clues. Despite the abundance of physical evidence, the Keddie Cabin murders became a tangled web of dead ends and false leads. Fingerprints were lifted, DNA samples collected, but none matched any known offenders in the system. The bloody footprint, too small to be of any use, remained a haunting reminder of the killer's presence. The murder weapons, a hammer and 2 knives, offered little help. They were common household items, untraceable to any specific owner. Interviews with neighbors and acquaintances yielded no substantial breakthroughs. The killer, it seemed, had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Adding to the frustration, the crime scene had been compromised. Due to miscommunication and the chaotic nature of the initial investigation, potential evidence was lost or contaminated. The passage of time further muddied the waters, making it increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction. Section 6. Shadows of Suspicion. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the investigation into the Ketty Cabin murders stalled. The lack of concrete leads fueled speculation, casting a wide net of suspicion over the small community. Among the persons of interest, 2 names emerged from the shadows: Martin Smart and a man known only as Beau Boubaid. Martin Smart, a neighbor with a history of violence and mental instability, had quarreled with Sue Sharp in the days leading up to the murders. He had even made threats against the family, boasting to friends that he would take care of Sue. Adding to the suspicion, Smart vanished from Ketty shortly after the murders, his whereabouts unknown for several years. Beau Boubaid, a mysterious figure with a violent criminal record, had been hired by the resort's owner to do odd jobs. He had been seen near Cabin 28 on the night of the murders and was known to possess a hammer similar to the one used in the killings. However, no concrete evidence linked Boubaid to the crime, and he maintained his innocence until his death in 2001. Section 7. Whispers of Confession. In a chilling twist, years after the murders, a therapist came forward with a startling claim. He alleged that Smart, during a therapy session, confessed to his involvement in the Ketty Cabin murders. According to the therapist, Smart admitted to killing Sue in a fit of rage after an argument. He claimed that Boubaid had assisted him in subduing the other victims and disposing of Tina's body. However, without corroborating evidence, Smart's alleged confession remained inadmissible in court. The therapist's notes, deemed unreliable due to the passage of time and the subjective nature of therapy sessions, were insufficient to secure an arrest warrant. Smart, who had resurfaced in Oregon, denied any involvement in the murders. He died in 2000, taking his secrets, if any, to the grave. Section 8. A Glimmer in the Wilderness. 3 years after the murders, a glimmer of hope emerged from the depths of despair. A skull fragment, later identified as Tina Sharp's, was discovered approximately 100 miles from Ketty. The discovery, while heartbreaking, brought a renewed sense of urgency to the investigation. Could this be the breakthrough they had been waiting for? Despite extensive searches, the rest of Tina's remains were never found. The location of the skull fragment, a remote area frequented by hunters and hikers, offered little in the way of new clues. The mystery of Tina's final moments, and the identity of her abductor, remained unsolved. Section 9. A Haunting Legacy. Over 4 decades have passed since the Ketty Cabin murders, yet the case continues to captivate and confound. The brutality of the crime, the mystery surrounding Tina's disappearance, and the lack of a definitive resolution have left an indelible mark on the small mountain community. The case, though officially cold, remains open, a haunting reminder of the darkness that once descended upon Cabin 28. Will the Ketty Cabin murders ever be solved? Will justice be served for Sue, John, Dana, and Tina? Or will their case remain an unsolved mystery, a chilling tale whispered around campfires and passed down through generations? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the memory of that horrific night in 1981 will forever linger in the shadows of the Sierra Nevada, a chilling reminder of the evil that men do. Germany lay in ruins after the First World War. The conflict had left the country devastated, with its cities reduced to rubble and its infrastructure in shambles. The war had not only taken a toll on the physical landscape, but also on the spirit of the German people. The once vibrant and industrious nation found itself grappling with the harsh realities of defeat and destruction. The once proud nation was defeated and humiliated. German soldiers returned home, not as heroes, but as symbols of a lost cause. The civilian population, too, bore the weight of this collective shame. The streets were filled with despondent faces, each one a testament to the deep sense of loss and disillusionment that had gripped the country. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh penalties on Germany. The terms of the treaty were severe, stripping Germany of its territories, limiting its military capabilities, and demanding exorbitant reparations. The treaty was seen as a diktat, a forced agreement that left Germany with little room for negotiation or reprieve. It blamed Germany for the war and demanded crippling reparations. These reparations were not just financial burdens, they were a constant reminder of Germany's defeat and the humiliation that came with it. The headlines in the newspapers screamed of the heavy toll that the treaty would take on the nation's economy and its future. These reparations crippled the German economy. The financial strain was immense, leading to widespread poverty and hardship. Store shelves were often empty, and basic necessities became luxuries that few could afford. The economic landscape was bleak, with no immediate relief in sight. Millions were unemployed, and inflation spiraled out of control. The job market collapsed, leaving countless individuals without work. Inflation soared to unprecedented levels, rendering the German mark almost worthless. People found themselves in long lines waiting for any opportunity to earn a living, but jobs were scarce. People struggled to afford basic necessities. The cost of living skyrocketed, and families found it increasingly difficult to put food on the table. Bread, a staple of the German diet, became a symbol of the economic struggle, with prices fluctuating wildly and often beyond the reach of ordinary citizens. The social fabric of Germany was also in tatters. Homelessness became rampant, and many lived in dilapidated housing conditions. The sense of community and solidarity that had once defined German society was eroding, replaced by a pervasive sense of despair and hopelessness. Returning soldiers faced unemployment and trauma. These men, who had once fought bravely for their country, now found themselves begging on the streets. The psychological scars of war were deep, and the lack of support and recognition only compounded their suffering. The loss of life and the devastation of war left deep scars on the nation's psyche. War memorials dotted the landscape, each one a somber reminder of the lives lost. Families grieved for their loved ones, and the collective mourning became a part of the national consciousness. There was a widespread sense of anger, resentment, and betrayal. The German people felt betrayed by their leaders and the international community. Protests erupted, and the streets were filled with angry crowds demanding justice and retribution. Many Germans refused to accept responsibility for the war. They believed that the Treaty of Versailles was a gross injustice, an unfair punishment that did not reflect the true causes of the conflict. Anti-treaty demonstrations became a common sight, with people voicing their dissent loudly and passionately. They felt that the Treaty of Versailles was unjust and humiliating. Public speeches and protest signs echoed this sentiment, calling for a revision of the treaty's terms. The sense of national humiliation was palpable, and it fueled a growing desire for change and redemption. This atmosphere of despair and resentment created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies. Radical groups began to gain traction, offering simple solutions to complex problems. Political graffiti and extremist rallies became increasingly common, reflecting the volatile and polarized nature of the times. People were desperate for change and willing to listen to anyone who promised a better future. The desperation was palpable, and it made the population susceptible to the promises of radical leaders who claimed to have the answers to Germany's woes. The Weimar Republic, established in 1919, was weak and unstable. It struggled to maintain order and provide effective governance. The political system was fraught with inefficiencies, and the government was often seen as out of touch with the needs and concerns of the people. It was unable to provide the leadership and direction that Germany so desperately needed. Political debates were often inconclusive, and government meetings failed to produce meaningful solutions. The lack of decisive action only deepened the sense of crisis and instability. The political landscape became increasingly fragmented and polarized. Different factions vied for power, each with its own agenda and vision for the future. Political clashes were frequent, and the atmosphere was charged with tension and hostility. Numerous political parties emerged, each with its own vision for Germany's future. The multiplicity of parties made it difficult to achieve consensus, and the political scene became a battleground of competing ideologies and interests. On the left, the communists called for a revolution to overthrow the capitalist system. They saw the economic crisis as an opportunity to implement radical change and establish a new social order. Their rallies and speeches attracted those who were disillusioned with the status quo and eager for a new beginning. On the right, nationalist and anti-Semitic groups blamed Jews and other minorities for Germany's problems. They propagated a narrative of betrayal and scapegoating, which resonated with many who were looking for someone to blame for their suffering. Anti-Semitic propaganda became widespread, further deepening social divisions. Amidst this turmoil, a young and ambitious Adolf Hitler began his rise to power. He capitalized on the widespread discontent and presented himself as the savior who could restore Germany's former glory. His speeches and rallies drew growing crowds, setting the stage for a dramatic and dangerous shift in the nation's future. Adolf Hitler was born in Austria in 1889, in the small town of Braunau am Inn. His early years were spent in a modest household where his father, Alois Hitler, worked as a customs official. Alois was known to be strict and authoritarian, often clashing with young Adolf, who was a sensitive and artistic child. His childhood was marked by poverty and a difficult relationship with his father. Alois had high expectations for his son, hoping he would follow in his footsteps and pursue a career in the civil service. However, Adolf's interests lay elsewhere, particularly in the arts. Hitler was a poor student and dropped out of school at the age of 16. His academic struggles were compounded by the death of his father in 1903, which left the family in financial difficulty. Despite his lack of formal education, Hitler was an avid reader and developed a keen interest in history and politics. He dreamed of becoming an artist but was rejected twice by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. These rejections were a significant blow to his self-esteem and ambitions. He spent the next few years living a bohemian lifestyle in Vienna, painting and selling postcards to make ends meet. Hitler's time in Vienna proved to be a turning point in his life. The city, with its vibrant cultural scene and diverse population, exposed him to new ideas and perspectives. However, it also deepened his sense of alienation and resentment. He lived in poverty and was exposed to the city's underbelly. The harsh realities of life in Vienna, including the widespread poverty and social inequality, left a lasting impression on him. He often stayed in homeless shelters and soup kitchens, where he encountered many other disenfranchised individuals. Vienna was a melting pot of cultures, and Hitler developed a deep hatred for the city's diverse population. He was particularly hostile towards Jews, whom he blamed for many of society's ills. This period marked the beginning of his radicalization and the development of his anti-Semitic views. He was particularly hostile towards Jews, whom he blamed for many of society's ills. His exposure to anti-Semitic literature and propaganda further fueled his prejudices. He began to see Jews as the root cause of all the problems he perceived in society. During his time in Vienna, Hitler became increasingly interested in politics. He attended political meetings and read extensively on the subject. His views were influenced by the nationalist and anti-Semitic ideologies that were prevalent in Vienna at the time. He was drawn to the ideas of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and pan-Germanism. These ideologies resonated with his own beliefs and experiences. He began to see himself as a savior of the German people, destined to lead them to greatness. He read voraciously, devouring pamphlets and books that espoused these views. His reading included works by prominent nationalist and anti-Semitic writers, which further shaped his worldview. He became convinced that he had a mission to rid Germany of its perceived enemies. Hitler's experiences in Vienna shaped his worldview and set him on the path to becoming the leader of the Nazi Party. His time in the city was a formative period that influenced his later actions and beliefs. It was in Vienna that he developed the ideas that would later form the basis of his political ideology. His early life had instilled in him a deep sense of resentment and a desire for power. The combination of personal failures, economic hardship, and exposure to radical ideologies created a potent mix that fueled his ambitions. His failure to achieve his artistic ambitions left him bitter and disillusioned. He redirected his energies towards politics, where he believed he could make a greater impact. His artistic dreams may have been crushed, but they were replaced by a burning desire to reshape society according to his vision. Vienna, with its social and ethnic tensions, provided fertile ground for his prejudices to take root. The city's complex social fabric and the conflicts he witnessed there played a crucial role in the development of his extremist views. These early experiences in Vienna were instrumental in shaping the man who would later become one of history's most infamous figures. The economic and social turmoil that gripped Germany after World War I was profound and far-reaching. The nation was left in a state of disarray, with its economy shattered and its people struggling to survive. The war had drained Germany of its resources, and the subsequent peace treaty only exacerbated the situation. This created an ideal breeding ground for extremist ideologies like Nazism. The political landscape was chaotic, with numerous factions vying for power and influence. Amidst this chaos, extremist groups found fertile ground to spread their radical ideas. The humiliation of defeat and the harsh conditions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles left many Germans feeling angry and betrayed. The treaty not only stripped Germany of its territories and military power, but also imposed heavy reparations that crippled the economy. They yearned for a return to national glory and sought scapegoats for their misfortunes. Nationalistic fervor grew, and many Germans began to look for someone to blame for their suffering. This sense of betrayal and desire for revenge became a powerful force in German society. Hyperinflation wiped out savings and plunged the middle class into poverty. The value of the German mark plummeted, and people found themselves unable to afford basic necessities. This economic instability further fueled the sense of desperation and hopelessness. Mass unemployment fueled a sense of desperation and hopelessness, making radical solutions increasingly appealing. With millions out of work, the social fabric of the nation began to unravel. People were willing to listen to anyone who promised a way out of their dire situation. Traditional political parties seemed unable to offer effective solutions, further eroding public trust in the existing order. The Weimar Republic was seen as weak and ineffective, unable to address the pressing issues facing the nation. This lack of confidence in the government created a vacuum that extremist groups were eager to fill. In this climate of uncertainty and fear, extremist groups, including the fledgling Nazi Party, found a receptive audience for their message of hate and resentment. They promised strong leadership and a return to national greatness, appealing to those who felt abandoned by the current system. They exploited economic anxieties, preyed on national pride, and skillfully channeled public anger towards scapegoats like Jews and communists. By identifying clear enemies, they provided simple answers to complex problems which resonated with a populace desperate for change. Hitler's own experiences of poverty and social alienation in Vienna resonated with the anxieties of many Germans. His personal story of struggle and his ability to articulate the frustrations of the masses made him a compelling figure. He offered a seductive, albeit dangerous vision of a powerful and racially pure Germany that would reclaim its rightful place in the world. This vision, combined with his charismatic oratory, drew many to his cause, setting the stage for the rise of one of history's most infamous regimes. In 1919, Hitler joined a small and obscure political party called the German Workers' Party. This party shared his extreme nationalist and anti-Semitic views. Hitler quickly rose through the ranks, becoming its leader in 1921. He proved to be a charismatic and effective speaker, captivating audiences with his fiery rhetoric. Under Hitler's leadership, the party changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party for short. He adopted the swastika as the party symbol and created a paramilitary organization called the Sturmabteilung, or SA. The SA, also known as brown shirts, were used to intimidate opponents and disrupt political meetings. The Nazi Party initially remained a fringe group with limited appeal. However, the party's fortunes changed dramatically after the Wall Street crash of 1929. The crash triggered a global economic depression, hitting Germany particularly hard. Millions were thrown out of work, and support for the Nazis surged. People were desperate for change, and saw Hitler as a strong leader who could restore Germany to greatness. The year was 1918. World War I was finally over. Germany was on the losing side. They signed a treaty called the Treaty of Versailles, which blamed Germany for the war. Germany had to pay a lot of money and give up land. Their military was also limited. This made the German people angry and ashamed. They felt like their leaders had betrayed them. The country was in chaos, with different groups fighting for control. In 1919, they tried to start a democracy called the Weimar Republic, but it was weak from the beginning. The government had many problems, especially with the economy and extreme political groups. People wanted a strong leader who could bring back Germany's pride. They didn't know that a dangerous man, Adolf Hitler, would soon appear. In the 1920s, Germany started to recover. But then, the Wall Street crash of 1929 happened, and the whole world went into a Great Depression. Germany was hit very hard. Many people lost their jobs and their savings. Money became worthless. People were starving and desperate. This economic crisis made people lose faith in the Weimar Republic. They wanted a solution, any solution. Extreme political parties both on the left and the right became popular. The Nazis, led by Hitler, took advantage of this. They offered simple answers to complicated problems. They blamed the Jews, communists, and other groups for Germany's problems. Many Germans started to believe them. The Nazi Party started in 1920. At first it was a small group with little power. Hitler joined in 1921 and quickly became a leader. He was a captivating speaker who appealed to people's emotions. His speeches were full of nationalistic ideas. He promised to make Germany great again and blamed the Jews and minorities for their problems. The Nazi Party slowly became more popular in the 1920s. The Great Depression gave them a huge opportunity. They promised jobs, food, and a return to Germany's former glory. This message resonated with people who were unemployed, hopeless, and felt betrayed by the government. The Nazis also used violence and intimidation against their opponents. Their paramilitary group, the SA, scared people and spread fear. By 1932, the Nazi Party was the biggest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. This rise to power was not sudden, but the result of years of strategic planning, propaganda, and exploitation of the economic and political instability that plagued Germany after World War I. The Nazis promised to restore Germany to its former glory, a message that resonated with many Germans who were disillusioned with the current state of affairs. In January 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. Hitler quickly took control. This appointment was a pivotal moment in history, as it marked the beginning of the end for the Weimar Republic and the start of a totalitarian regime. Hitler wasted no time in consolidating his power, using both legal and illegal means to eliminate his political opponents and secure his position. When the Reichstag building burned down in a suspicious fire, he used it as an excuse to take away people's freedoms. The Reichstag fire decree allowed him to arrest communists and other political adversaries, effectively silencing any opposition. This event was a turning point that enabled Hitler to push through his radical agenda with little resistance. The Enabling Act of 1933 gave Hitler absolute power. This act allowed him to enact laws without the involvement of the Reichstag, effectively rendering the parliament obsolete. With this newfound authority, Hitler began to reshape Germany according to his vision, dismantling democratic institutions and replacing them with mechanisms of total control. He banned all other political parties and created a totalitarian state. The Nazi regime used propaganda to manipulate public opinion and maintain control over the populace. Political dissent was not tolerated, and those who opposed the regime were swiftly dealt with, often through imprisonment or worse. With no one to oppose him, Hitler was free to do whatever he wanted. He used his charismatic oratory skills to rally the masses, promising a new era of prosperity and national pride. His speeches were designed to evoke strong emotions, often playing on fears and prejudices to unite the German people under his rule. He turned Germany into a one-party state and removed anyone he thought was disloyal from the government, courts, and military. This purge extended to all levels of society, ensuring that only those loyal to Hitler and the Nazi ideology held positions of power. This created an atmosphere of fear and obedience as people were afraid to speak out against the regime. He created concentration camps to imprison his enemies. These camps were initially used to detain political prisoners, but they soon expanded to include Jews, Romani people, and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. The conditions in these camps were horrific, and many prisoners did not survive. He started secretly building up the military, breaking the Treaty of Versailles. This rearmament was a clear violation of the treaty, but it went largely unchallenged by other nations at the time. Hitler's military buildup was part of his broader plan to expand German territory and establish a dominant position in Europe. Germany was now under Hitler's control, and the world was on the brink of war. The aggressive policies and actions of the Nazi regime set the stage for the outbreak of World War II, a conflict that would have devastating consequences for millions of people around the globe. Joseph Goebbels was a master of propaganda. He became the Minister of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment in 1933. Goebbels knew how powerful the media could be. He used radio, movies, newspapers, and posters to spread the Nazi message. He controlled everything people saw and heard and censored anything that didn't agree with Nazi beliefs. Goebbels' propaganda was very effective. It portrayed Hitler as a savior who would rescue Germany. It praised the Nazi Party and its ideas and made Jews, communists, and other groups look bad. This created an atmosphere of fear and hatred. Germans were constantly bombarded with Nazi propaganda. They were told that their country was surrounded by enemies, that they were the superior race, and that they had the right to rule over others. The Nazi regime was built on terror and violence. From the very beginning, the Nazis used fear as a tool to control the population and eliminate any form of dissent. Their rise to power was marked by a series of brutal actions aimed at consolidating their grip on Germany. The Gestapo, their secret police, ruthlessly eliminated any opposition. They operated with almost complete autonomy, arresting, torturing, and executing those who were seen as threats to the Nazi ideology. The mere mention of the Gestapo was enough to instill fear in the hearts of the people. Concentration camps like Dachau and Buchenwald were built to imprison anyone the Nazis didn't like, political opponents, intellectuals, and anyone who dared to speak out against the regime. These camps quickly became places of unimaginable suffering and death. Jews, Roma people, and other minorities were targeted with relentless persecution. The Nazis viewed these groups as inferior and sought to eradicate them from society. Homosexuals, people with disabilities, and others who did not fit the Nazi ideal were also persecuted. The regime's goal was to create a pure Aryan race, and anyone who did not conform to this vision was at risk. The Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, was the most horrific result of Nazi ideology. This genocide was meticulously planned and executed with the aim of completely annihilating the Jewish population in Europe. The persecution of Jews started slowly, with discrimination and violence. Anti-Semitic laws were enacted and Jews were increasingly marginalized and dehumanized. Jews lost their citizenship and were banned from certain jobs. They were forced to wear identifying badges and were subjected to constant harassment and violence. People refused to buy from their businesses. Jewish shops were boycotted and their owners were left with no means of livelihood. Then, on Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass in November 1938, Jewish businesses and synagogues were attacked. This pogrom marked a significant escalation in the Nazi campaign against the Jews. Thousands of Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Families were torn apart, and many never saw their loved ones again. The Holocaust was a carefully planned and executed genocide. The Nazis devised the final solution, a plan to exterminate the Jewish people through mass murder. Jews were rounded up and sent to extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka. These camps were designed for efficient mass killing. They were gassed, shot, or worked to death. The scale of the atrocities committed during the Holocaust is almost beyond comprehension, and it remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. Hitler wanted Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. He believed Germany had the right to take land in the east. He first took over Austria in 1938. Then he demanded the Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia where many Germans lived. The Munich Agreement, signed by Germany, Britain, France, and Italy, gave the Sudetenland to Germany. They hoped this would prevent a war, but it only made Hitler want more. In March 1939, Germany invaded and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France finally realized that appeasement had failed. They promised to protect Poland. But Hitler, undeterred, made a deal with the Soviet Union in August 1939. Secretly, they agreed to divide Eastern Europe between themselves. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. Hitler's rise to power and the horrors of the Holocaust show us the dangers of unchecked hatred, extreme nationalism, and totalitarian regimes. The Nazi ideology, rooted in racism and anti-Semitism, led to the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable. This dark chapter in history serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when humanity loses its moral compass. The world watched in horror as Hitler's war machine plunged Europe into darkness. Cities were reduced to rubble and countless lives were lost in the relentless pursuit of power. The devastation was not limited to the battlefield. Civilians suffered immensely, with families torn apart and entire communities obliterated. It took the combined might of the Allied forces to defeat Nazi Germany, but the cost of victory was immense. Brave soldiers from around the world fought valiantly, facing unimaginable horrors to bring an end to the tyranny. The liberation of concentration camps revealed the full extent of the atrocities committed, shocking the world and solidifying the resolve to ensure such evil would never rise again. Millions were dead, and the world was scarred. The physical and emotional wounds ran deep, with survivors bearing the weight of their experiences for the rest of their lives. The aftermath of the war left a landscape of destruction and a profound sense of loss that would take generations to heal. We must never forget the lessons of this dark time in history. The Nuremberg trials brought some measure of justice, holding key perpetrators accountable for their crimes. Yet the true justice lies in remembrance and education, ensuring that future generations understand the gravity of these events. We must always defend democracy and human rights. The establishment of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were steps towards a more just and peaceful world. These institutions and documents serve as a foundation for protecting the dignity and rights of all individuals, regardless of their background. We must challenge intolerance and discrimination whenever we see it. Racism, xenophobia, and other forms of bigotry have no place in our society. By standing up against these injustices, we honor the memory of those who suffered and ensure a more inclusive and equitable world for future generations. We must remember the victims of the Holocaust and fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of prejudice. The symbols of this dark period, such as the yellow stars and the gates of Auschwitz, serve as powerful reminders of the consequences of hatred. By keeping their memory alive, we commit to combating prejudice in all its forms. We must learn from the past to build a better future. Education is key to preventing history from repeating itself. By teaching the next generation about the Holocaust and the dangers of hatred, we equip them with the knowledge and empathy needed to create a more compassionate world. The words "never again" must be more than a slogan. They must be a commitment to action, a pledge to uphold the values of justice, equality, and human dignity. Every remembrance ceremony, every memorial event, is a call to renew this commitment. They must be a call to action. We must actively work to prevent the rise of hatred and intolerance in our communities. By engaging in dialogue, supporting human rights initiatives, and standing in solidarity with those who are marginalized, we can make a difference. We must all work together to make sure such atrocities never happen again. It is a collective responsibility that requires vigilance, education, and a commitment to the principles of humanity. Only by uniting in this cause can we hope to build a future free from the shadows of the past. He was known as the Candyman, a seemingly harmless moniker masking a horrifying reality. The nickname Candyman conjures images of sweetness and innocence, but in the case of Dean Corll, it was a grotesque irony. Dean Corll, a man who presented an amiable facade to the world, harbored a sinister secret within. To his neighbors, he was the friendly man who ran a candy factory, always ready with a smile and a kind word. He was a predator hiding in plain sight. His charm and generosity were his weapons, disarming those around him and luring his unsuspecting victims into his web of deceit. The candy he so freely distributed to children in his Houston neighborhood was nothing but a lure, a sugary trap leading to unimaginable horrors. The children, drawn to his seemingly benign offerings, had no idea of the darkness that awaited them. Corll's crimes, a grotesque tapestry of abduction, torture, and murder, would forever stain the city's history. His methods were as chilling as they were methodical, turning his home into a house of horrors where innocence was brutally extinguished. His victims, all young boys, became tragic testaments to his depravity. Each face, each name, a reminder of lives cut short and families shattered by his monstrous actions. Their youthful innocence stood in stark contrast to the darkness that consumed them within the walls of Corll's home, a place that should have been a sanctuary, but instead became a tomb. The very walls seemed to echo with the silent screams of his victims, a haunting reminder of the evil that lurked within. The Candyman's reign of terror, stretching from 1970 to 1973, left an indelible mark on the hearts of Houstonians. The community, once vibrant and trusting, was plunged into a state of fear and suspicion. It shattered the illusion of safety and instilled a deep sense of unease that lingered long after the headlines faded. Parents held their children closer, and the once carefree streets became places of caution and vigilance. How could such evil exist, concealed beneath a veneer of normalcy? The question gnawed at the collective consciousness of the city, a chilling reminder that the face of evil often wears a mask of kindness. It was a question that haunted the city, a chilling reminder that monsters often wear the most ordinary of faces. Dean Corll's story is a stark warning of the dangers that can lurk behind the most unassuming exteriors, a dark chapter in history that continues to resonate with a sense of horror and disbelief. Born in Indiana in 1939, Dean Corll's early life seemed typical of the era. He grew up in a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and the values of hard work and discipline were deeply ingrained. His parents, Mary and Arnold Corll, were strict but loving, ensuring that their children adhered to the societal norms of the time. Dean Corll's early life offered little indication of the monster he would become. In school, he was an average student, neither excelling nor failing. He participated in typical childhood activities, blending in with his peers. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, there were subtle signs that all was not well. Raised in a strict household, he was a quiet and withdrawn child. His parents' high expectations and rigid discipline left little room for emotional expression. Dean often retreated into himself, finding solace in solitary activities. This isolation would later become a defining characteristic of his personality. There were signs, whispers of disturbing behavior that occasionally surfaced. Some classmates recalled moments when Dean's actions seemed out of place, even unsettling. However, these incidents were fleeting and easily dismissed by those around him. But they were easily dismissed, overshadowed by his unremarkable demeanor. To the outside world, Dean Corll was just another face in the crowd, a young man with no extraordinary traits or ambitions. This ability to blend in would later become one of his most dangerous attributes. Corll's path took a significant turn when he moved to Houston in the 1960s. The bustling city offered new opportunities and a chance to reinvent himself. It was here that the seeds of his dark future were sown. He found employment at the Houston Post Company, a job that provided stability and a sense of purpose. However, it was not the work itself that would define his time in Houston, but rather the connections he made and the opportunities he seized. A job that placed him in close proximity to children, a fact that would prove tragically fateful. Corll's interactions with the youth of the community began innocently enough, but his intentions soon took a sinister turn, a fact that would prove tragically fateful. It was during this time that he began to hone his manipulative skills, using his position and his unassuming nature to gain the trust of those around him. It was during this time that he began to hone his manipulative skills, using his position and his unassuming nature to gain the trust of those around him. He became adept at presenting a friendly and trustworthy facade, masking his true intentions. Using his position and his unassuming nature to gain the trust of those around him. His ability to blend into the community, to appear as just another friendly face, allowed him to operate undetected for years. The candy factory, where Corll later worked, would become intrinsically linked to his horrific legacy. The factory, a place of sweetness and light, became a symbol of Corll's twisted psyche, a stark reminder that even the most innocuous of settings can harbor unspeakable darkness. It was here that he earned his nickname, the Candyman, a title that would later send chills down the spines of those who learned its true meaning. The factory, with its innocent facade, masked the horrors that Corll would later unleash. A title that would later send chills down the spines of those who learned its true meaning. The nickname, once associated with childhood joy, became synonymous with terror and death. The factory, a place of sweetness and light, became a symbol of Corll's twisted psyche, a stark reminder that even the most innocuous of settings can harbor unspeakable darkness. The juxtaposition of the candy factory's cheerful exterior and the dark deeds that occurred within its walls is a chilling testament to Corll's ability to mask his true nature, a stark reminder that even the most innocuous of settings can harbor unspeakable darkness. The story of Dean Corll serves as a grim reminder that evil can lurk behind the most ordinary of facades, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. No one commits such heinous acts in complete isolation. Corll, like many predators, sought to create a web of complicity, drawing others into his world of darkness. He found willing participants in two troubled teenagers, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. Brooks, a quiet and withdrawn boy, was drawn to Corll's attention, seeking acceptance and a sense of belonging. Henley, on the other hand, was more outgoing and charismatic, but he too was vulnerable, craving the approval and validation that Coral so readily offered. Coral masterfully exploited their vulnerabilities, showering them with gifts, money, and a twisted sense of camaraderie. He manipulated them, gradually desensitizing them to the horrors he inflicted until they became active participants in his gruesome games. Brooks and Henley, once victims themselves, were transformed into perpetrators, forever bound to the man who had orchestrated their descent into darkness. Coral's methods were chilling in their simplicity and effectiveness. He had a way of blending into the background, appearing as just another friendly face in the neighborhood. This facade allowed him to gain the trust of his unsuspecting victims with ease. He preyed on vulnerable boys, often runaways or those from troubled homes, using the allure of free candy and the promise of a good time to lure them back to his house. Coral's charm and seemingly harmless demeanor made it easy for him to convince these boys to follow him, believing they were in for a fun adventure. Once there, the boys were trapped, their fates sealed by Coral's sadistic desires. The house, which appeared ordinary from the outside, became a prison of unimaginable horror. The boys, realizing too late the danger they were in, found themselves in a situation from which there was no escape. Inside the house, a nightmare awaited. The basement, cluttered and filled with menacing shadows, was the epicenter of Coral's depravity. It was here that he would unleash his darkest impulses, turning the space into a chamber of horrors. Coral, aided by Brooks and Henley, would subject his victims to unimaginable horrors. These young men who had fallen under Coral's influence became willing participants in his gruesome acts. Together, they would tie up the boys, ensuring there was no chance of escape. Torture, both physical and psychological, became a regular part of his twisted rituals. The boys were subjected to relentless torment, their cries for help echoing in the dark, empty rooms. The psychological trauma inflicted was as severe as the physical pain, leaving the boys in a state of utter despair. The boys were often restrained, abused, and ultimately murdered, their bodies discarded like refuse in various locations around Houston. Coral showed no remorse, treating his victims as mere objects to be used and disposed of. The secluded areas where he buried the bodies became silent witnesses to his heinous crimes. The sheer brutality of Coral's crimes sent shockwaves through the community. As news of the atrocities spread, the community was gripped by fear and disbelief. Candlelight vigils were held, and people gathered to mourn the loss of the young lives taken so senselessly. How could anyone, let alone someone known as the Candyman, commit such acts of depravity? The nickname, once associated with harmless fun, now took on a sinister connotation. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the friendly man who handed out candy with the monster who had committed such unspeakable acts. The question hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly normal individuals. It served as a stark warning that evil can wear a friendly face, and that vigilance is necessary to protect the vulnerable from those who would do them harm. Brian Thompson was on top of the world, CEO of United Healthcare, a company that had become a household name under his leadership. He was a visionary, a man who could see the future of healthcare and make it a reality. His colleagues admired him, his competitors envied him, and his employees respected him. He was the epitome of success in the corporate world. One of the most powerful men in American healthcare, Thompson had a reputation for being both ruthless and compassionate. He knew how to make tough decisions, but he also knew the importance of empathy in the healthcare industry. His influence extended beyond the boardroom. He was a key player in shaping healthcare policies and reforms. He had it all: money, power, influence. His lifestyle was the stuff of dreams: luxury cars, sprawling estates, and vacations in the most exotic locations. Yet, despite his immense wealth, he remained grounded, often seen engaging in philanthropic activities and giving back to the community. Then it was over. Just like that. In a matter of seconds, the life of a man who seemed invincible was cut short. The news of his sudden demise sent shockwaves through the corporate world and beyond. Thompson was attending an industry conference in New York City, a routine event for someone of his stature. It was a gathering of the brightest minds in healthcare, a place where ideas were exchanged and future collaborations were born. He was walking out of the hotel, December 4th, 2024. The air was crisp, the city bustling with its usual energy. Little did anyone know that this day would mark a tragic turn in corporate history, a date that would forever be etched in the annals of corporate America. It was a day that started like any other, but ended in a way that no one could have predicted. A lone gunman emerged from the crowd, shots rang out, Thompson was dead. The scene was chaotic, with people running in all directions trying to make sense of the horror that had just unfolded. The world watched in shock. News channels around the globe broadcasted the tragic event, and social media was flooded with messages of disbelief and sorrow. How could this happen to someone so influential, so protected? How could this happen, in broad daylight, to someone like Brian Thompson? The questions were endless, and the answers seemed elusive. The incident left a void in the corporate world, a sense of vulnerability that was hard to shake off. The answer, as we would soon discover, lay in the hands of a young man named Luigi Mangione, a name that would soon become infamous, a name that would be associated with one of the most shocking events in corporate history. The investigation that followed would reveal a web of intrigue, motives, and secrets that no one could have anticipated. It was a scene straight out of a Hollywood thriller, the kind of moment that makes your heart race and your palms sweat. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Crowds bustling on the streets of Manhattan, unaware of the impending chaos. People going about their daily lives, completely oblivious to the dark turn the day was about to take. Thompson, surrounded by aides, stepped out of the hotel. He was a man of power, a figure who commanded respect and attention wherever he went. His presence was imposing, and his entourage only added to his aura of authority. He was heading towards a waiting car, a sleek black vehicle that screamed importance. The car was a symbol of his status, a mobile fortress that separated him from the common man. A nondescript young man in a gray hoodie slipped through the cracks. He was invisible in the sea of faces, just another person in the crowd. But his eyes were focused, his movements deliberate. He moved with a purpose, each step calculated. He knew exactly where he was going and what he had to do. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a gun. 3 shots rang out, each one echoing through the concrete canyons of the city. The sound was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual hum of urban life. Thompson crumpled to the ground. Panic ensued. Screams filled the air, a chorus of fear and confusion. People scattered, running in every direction, desperate to escape the sudden violence. The gunman melted into the chaos, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. He was a ghost, vanishing into the crowd, leaving behind only questions and terror. The assassination sent shockwaves through the nation. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, headlines blaring the tragic news. People were in shock, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. Who was this young man? The question was on everyone's lips. He was a mystery, an enigma that needed to be solved. His identity was the key to understanding the motive behind the assassination. And why would he target Brian Thompson, the seemingly untouchable titan of the healthcare industry? Thompson was a man who had built an empire, a figure who seemed invincible. His death was a blow to the very heart of the industry. The answer would soon surface, exposing the deep-seated anger and resentment simmering beneath the surface of American society. It was a story of power, corruption, and the lengths to which people would go to make their voices heard. The assassination was just the beginning, a spark that would ignite a firestorm of revelations and consequences. Luigi Mangione, a name that would soon be plastered across every news channel in the country. He was 26 years old, a brilliant mind, a graduate of the prestigious University of Pennsylvania. He came from a good family. What drove him to murder? Mangione's life was a study in contrasts, a bright future ahead of him. Yet he harbored a dark secret, a seething rage against the healthcare system. He believed it was a system rigged against the ordinary American. He saw Brian Thompson as the embodiment of that system, the architect of its greed and indifference. The United States healthcare system, a system designed to maximize profits, not save lives. A system where people go bankrupt to afford life-saving treatments. A system where insurance companies dictate who gets care and who doesn't. Mangione saw this firsthand. His own family had been victims of this broken system, denied claims, exorbitant costs, the despair of facing a medical emergency without the safety net of affordable health care. This experience ignited a fire in him, a fire that would eventually consume him. Section 5. The Law's Verdict and a Divided Public. The manhunt for Luigi Mangione was swift and decisive. Authorities launched an extensive search operation, deploying officers across multiple districts. The urgency was palpable, as the community reeled from the shock of the incident. He was apprehended within 24 hours of the shooting. The rapid response showcased the efficiency of law enforcement, but it also raised questions about the underlying issues that led to such a drastic act. A 9mm handgun was recovered at the scene. This piece of evidence was crucial in piecing together the events that transpired. The crime scene was meticulously examined, with every detail documented to build a strong case against Mangione. His manifesto, a scathing indictment of the healthcare system, was found in his apartment. The document outlined his grievances and provided insight into his motivations. It painted a picture of a man pushed to the edge by systemic failures. The trial was, well, a media circus. Reporters flocked to the courthouse, eager to capture every moment. The case drew national attention with live broadcasts and constant updates. The public was glued to their screens, forming opinions based on the sensational coverage. Mangione became a symbol of resistance for some, a cold-blooded killer for others. The nation was divided, with heated debates erupting in communities and online forums. Some saw him as a martyr fighting against an unjust system, while others viewed his actions as inexcusable. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The deliberation was thorough, considering the weight of the evidence presented. The verdict was a culmination of weeks of testimony, expert opinions, and emotional appeals from both sides. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision was met with mixed reactions. For some, it was a just punishment for a heinous crime. For others, it was a stark reminder of the issues that remain unresolved. The verdict did little to quell the debate raging across the country. The case highlighted deep-seated issues within the healthcare system and the justice system. As discussions continue, the story of Luigi Mangione serves as a catalyst for change, urging society to address the root causes of such tragedies. Section 6. Echoes in the corporate halls of United Healthcare. The murder of its CEO sent shockwaves through United Healthcare, a wave of fear, uncertainty. The company went into damage control mode, issuing statements, holding press conferences, but the damage was done. The company's reputation lay in tatters, its stock price plummeted. The public's trust, already fragile, was shattered. The murder forced the company to confront a truth it had long tried to ignore. The American people were fed up with the healthcare system. Section 7. A nation divided, a system on trial. The murder of Brian Thompson exposed a deep divide in American society. On one side, those who condemned the violence. They called for justice. They mourned the loss of a brilliant business leader. On the other side, those who saw Mangione as a folk hero, a vigilante who had struck a blow against corporate greed. The case sparked a national conversation about the state of healthcare in America, about the role of corporations in society, about the very nature of justice. It was a conversation that had been long overdue. Section 8. Where do we go from here? The murder of Brian Thompson was a tragedy, a life cut short, a family torn apart, but it was also a wake-up call, a stark reminder that the American healthcare system is broken, that corporate greed has consequences, that we can no longer ignore the plight of millions of Americans who are suffering. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? Section 9. A call for action. We, the American people, have the power to change things. We can demand better from our elected officials. We can hold corporations accountable for their actions. We can create a healthcare system that works for everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. The time for complacency is over. The time for action is now. Let the death of Brian Thompson not be in vain. Let it be the catalyst for real and lasting change. Let us honor his memory by creating a more just and equitable society for all. Los Angeles, 1977. A sprawling metropolis, known for its glitz and glamour, where dreams were made and broken. The city was a beacon for those seeking fame and fortune, a place where the American dream seemed within reach. But as the sun set and the city lights flickered on, a different Los Angeles emerged. A city of dreams, bathed in the golden glow of Hollywood. The iconic Hollywood sign stood tall, a symbol of hope and aspiration. Hollywood Boulevard buzzed with life, its bright lights and bustling streets a testament to the city's allure. Yet for every star that shone brightly, there were countless others who faded into obscurity. But beneath the glamour, a darkness lurked. The back streets and alleyways told a different story, one of desperation and danger. Shadows moved stealthily, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension. It was a city of contrasts, where the line between dreams and nightmares was often blurred. The air, thick with smog and unease. The infamous Los Angeles smog cast a pall over the city, a constant reminder of its environmental struggles. Streetlights struggled to pierce through the haze, creating an eerie, almost surreal atmosphere. It was as if the city itself was suffocating under the weight of its own contradictions. The streets, alive with whispers of something sinister, conversations in hushed tones, furtive glances, and the ever-present sense of being watched. It was a city on edge, where trust was a rare commodity. The whispers hinted at a growing menace, an evil that was slowly taking root. An evil was about to rise, casting a long, terrifying shadow over the city of angels. The signs were there for those who knew where to look. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, both literally and metaphorically. The city was on the brink of a nightmare, one that would leave an indelible mark on its history. The late 70s were a time of change and uncertainty. The cultural landscape was shifting, and with it, the mood of the city. People walked the streets in their bell-bottoms and platform shoes, trying to hold on to a sense of normalcy. But beneath the surface, there was a growing sense of unease. The Vietnam War had left its scars, and a sense of disillusionment hung heavy in the air. The war had taken its toll on the nation, and Los Angeles was no exception. Protests and demonstrations were common, as people grappled with the aftermath of a conflict that had divided the country. The city's residents were weary, their optimism eroded by years of turmoil. Disco music blared from every radio, a fleeting distraction from the growing anxieties of the time. The pulsating beats and vibrant rhythms provided a temporary escape, a way to forget the troubles of the world, if only for a moment. Nightclubs were packed with people dancing the night away, seeking solace in the music and the company of others. Amidst this backdrop of unease, a nightmare was about to unfold. The city's vibrant facade was about to be shattered, revealing the darkness that lay beneath. The empty streets at night took on a more sinister tone, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. The city of angels, once a beacon of hope and opportunity, was about to become synonymous with terror. The storm clouds gathered, casting long shadows over the city's landmarks. The Hollywood sign, once a symbol of dreams, now seemed to foretell a grim future. The city was on the brink of a transformation, one that would forever alter its identity. The Hillside Stranglers were about to etch their names in the annals of criminal history, forever changing the landscape of fear in Los Angeles. Their reign of terror would leave an indelible mark on the city, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the brightest of lights. The city of angels would never be the same again. October 17, 1977. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. The city of Los Angeles was bustling with its usual energy, unaware of the dark cloud that was about to descend upon it. The day the nightmare began. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the city, an eerie stillness took hold. The streets, usually filled with the sounds of life, seemed unusually quiet, as if the city itself sensed the impending doom. A jogger made a grim discovery on a hillside overlooking the city. The early morning light did little to soften the horror of what lay before them. The serene view of the city below was starkly contrasted by the gruesome scene on the hillside. A young woman's body lay discarded, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at the heavens. The scene was haunting, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the presence of evil. Her name was Yolanda Washington, the first victim of a terrifying reign of terror. Yolanda was more than just a name in the headlines. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with dreams and aspirations. Yolanda, a bright and beautiful young woman, had been brutally murdered. Her smile, once full of life, was now a memory cherished by those who knew her. The brutality of her death left a scar on the community, a wound that would take time to heal. Her body bore the marks of torture, her life extinguished in a horrific manner. The details of her suffering were too gruesome to comprehend, painting a picture of unimaginable pain and cruelty. The city gasped in horror as news of the murder spread like wildfire. The media coverage was relentless, each headline more shocking than the last. The community was in a state of shock, struggling to come to terms with the reality of the situation. This was no ordinary crime. It was the work of a predator, cold and calculating. The police were on high alert, knowing they were dealing with a dangerous individual who showed no remorse. Fear gripped the hearts of young women across Los Angeles. The sense of safety that once existed was shattered, replaced by a pervasive fear that lingered in every shadow and dark corner. The image of Yolanda's lifeless body on that hillside served as a chilling reminder that evil lurked in the shadows. Memorials began to appear, flowers and candles marking the spot where her life was so cruelly taken. The city held its breath, bracing itself for what was to come. The police increased their patrols, and the community banded together, hoping to find solace in unity. But the fear remained, a constant reminder of the darkness that had descended upon Los Angeles. Behind the terror that gripped Los Angeles were two men, Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono. Their reign of terror would leave an indelible mark on the city, casting a long shadow over its streets and its people. The fear they instilled was palpable, a dark cloud that hung over the city, suffocating its residents with dread. Cousins by blood, they were bound by a shared darkness, a perverse appetite for control and violence. Their bond was more than familial, it was a sinister alliance forged in the depths of their twisted psyches. Together, they would embark on a path of destruction that would forever alter the landscape of criminal history. They were the Hillside Stranglers, their names forever etched in the annals of criminal history. The media frenzy that surrounded their crimes only added to their infamy, turning them into the stuff of nightmares. Their heinous acts were splashed across headlines, a grim reminder of the evil that lurked in the shadows. Kenneth Bianchi, a handsome young man with a troubled past, hid a sinister secret behind his charming facade. His outward appearance belied the darkness within, a darkness that would soon be unleashed upon an unsuspecting city. Bianchi's charm was his weapon, a tool he used to manipulate and deceive those around him. A drifter and a con artist, he possessed a dangerous combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. His ability to blend in, to appear normal, was perhaps his most terrifying trait. It allowed him to move through society undetected, a predator hiding in plain sight. His cunning and resourcefulness made him a formidable foe for law enforcement. Angelo Buono, older and more physically imposing, exuded an air of quiet menace. His presence was intimidating, his demeanor cold and calculating. Buono's influence over Bianchi was profound, shaping the younger man's descent into darkness. Together they formed a deadly duo, each feeding off the other's malevolence. A domineering personality, he found a willing accomplice in his younger cousin. Buono's control over Bianchi was absolute, a master manipulating his puppet. Their partnership was a perfect storm of evil, a combination of brains and brawn that would prove deadly for their victims. Together, they embarked on a murderous rampage that would terrorize Los Angeles. Their crimes were methodical, their actions calculated. The city was gripped by fear, its residents living in constant terror of becoming the next victim. The police were baffled, the public horrified, as the body count continued to rise. Their modus operandi was chillingly efficient. They would stalk their prey, selecting their victims with care. Once chosen, the women stood little chance against the duo's combined strength and cunning. The precision with which they executed their crimes left little evidence, making it difficult for authorities to track them down. They would target young women, using their charm and good looks to lure them into a false sense of security. The victims, unsuspecting and trusting, were easy prey for the predators. The facade of normalcy that Bianchi and Buono presented was disarming, making it all the more shocking when their true intentions were revealed. Once they had their victims trapped, the true nature of their depravity would be revealed. The horror that followed was unimaginable, a descent into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The brutality of their actions left a lasting scar on the city, a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind even the most charming of facades. Days turned into weeks, and the body count rose. The victims, all young women, were found strangled, their bodies discarded in the hills surrounding the city. Los Angeles was in the grip of terror, the Hillside Stranglers holding the city hostage in a nightmare of their own making. Fear permeated every aspect of life in Los Angeles. Women were afraid to go out alone, their every move shadowed by the fear of becoming the next victim. The once vibrant city seemed to hold its breath, paralyzed by the reign of terror unleashed by the Hillside Stranglers. The police were under immense pressure to catch the killers. The investigation intensified, with hundreds of officers working tirelessly to track down the perpetrators of these heinous crimes. The city waited with bated breath, hoping against hope for a swift end to the nightmare. The LAPD, overwhelmed by the scale of the murders and the media frenzy surrounding them, formed a special task force. Every resource was dedicated to catching the stranglers. Detectives worked day and night, following every lead, however small, in a desperate race against time. The pressure was immense. The city demanded justice, the victims' families desperate for closure. The investigation took on a personal significance for the detectives involved. They were not just chasing shadows, they were hunting monsters. The investigation, however, was fraught with challenges. The stranglers were meticulous, leaving little to no evidence at the crime scenes. Frustration mounted as every lead seemed to turn into a dead end. But the detectives refused to give up. They knew that somewhere out there, amidst the sprawling metropolis, lay the answers they so desperately sought. A break in the case came from an unexpected source, Kenneth Bianchi himself. Driven by a desire to escape justice and perhaps fueled by a twisted sense of self-preservation, he committed a fatal error. He struck again, but this time in Washington state, leaving behind a crucial clue that would unravel the entire conspiracy. Bianchi's attempt to start a new life quickly unraveled. His crimes in Washington bore striking similarities to the Hillside Strangler murders. When questioned by the police, Bianchi's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He cracked under pressure, revealing his role in the Los Angeles murders and implicating his unsuspecting cousin. Bianchi's confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The manhunt for Angelo Buono intensified, the net closing in on the remaining Hillside Strangler.
Imagine you're a backpacker traveling through the beautiful, vast wilderness of Australia. The world is full of possibilities, but as you set up camp near a peaceful national park, a chilling danger lurks in the shadows. One that will claim the lives of young travelers, leaving behind a trail of blood and a killer who remains elusive. This is the story of the Backpacker Murders, one of Australia's most infamous crime sprees that terrorized the nation for years. But what made these crimes so terrifying? And how did the killer evade capture for so long? The mystery of the backpacker. Murders has intrigued not only Australians but people worldwide. The fact that the crimes occurred in some of the most idyllic, tourist-friendly parts of the country created an eerie contrast. This case wasn't just about a killer, it was about a chilling fear that seemed to permeate the wilderness, forever altering the way we think about safety and innocence in the Australian outback. The Australian wilderness and its allure. The Australian outback is not just a physical space. It is an almost mythical environment that attracts travelers from all corners of the world. Known for its vast, rugged beauty and seemingly endless horizons, the outback represents freedom and adventure to those who come to explore it. For backpackers, it's a place to disconnect from the bustle of modern life and immerse oneself in nature. This allure was what drew many of the victims to the area. However, it was precisely this allure of the open road, the isolation, and the raw beauty of the wilderness that left many travelers vulnerable. The terrain is remote and difficult to navigate, which made it the perfect hunting ground for a killer who knew the land intimately. For the victims, the promise of adventure would soon turn into a horrifying nightmare. The outback was no longer just a destination for exploration, but became a place of unimaginable fear. The victims. Innocence. Lost when we think of the backpacker murders, it's important to remember the victims. These weren't just nameless statistics in a crime story. They were young people, often far from home, in the prime of their lives, eager to experience the world. Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, two British backpackers, were among the first to disappear in 1990. Their fates set off the chilling chain of events that would unfold. The loss of young travelers from other parts of the world, like Germany's Anja Habschied and Gabor Neugebauer, or the tragic deaths of others who were yet to be found, sent shockwaves through the global community. For many, it served as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking beyond the postcard-perfect view of Australia. These murders not only left an indelible mark on their families, but also served as a tragic reminder of the risks faced by those who ventured into unfamiliar lands. For the families and friends of the victims, the mystery surrounding the deaths would haunt them forever, with their grief compounded by the years of uncertainty. a series of unexplained disappearances. The first victims, Clark and Walters, vanished in the New South Wales area, a region often frequented by tourists. Their disappearance was initially brushed off as another unfortunate incident in the unpredictable life of a backpacker. Many people were quick to chalk it up to the usual dangers of the road: hitchhiking, remote camping, or simply falling prey to the unpredictable nature of the outback. However, as other backpackers went missing or were found, brutally murdered, it became clear that these weren't isolated incidents. These young women weren't just part of a statistic of the backpacker lifestyle. They were victims of a calculated, horrific crime. The increasing number of disappearances painted a chilling picture that would soon lead to the realization that the killer was targeting a specific group of people, travelers who trusted the open road, but whose trust would soon be betrayed. The evidence. What was left behind? The first major clue came when the bodies of Clark and Walters were discovered in a remote area near Belanglo State Forest, which would become infamously linked to the murders. The remains were badly decomposed, complicating the task of identifying the cause of death. Early forensic examination showed signs of sexual assault and brutal violence, suggesting that these murders weren't crimes of opportunity, but carefully planned and executed. As more bodies were discovered, each revealing similar signs of torture and violent death, it became evident that this was the work of a serial killer, someone who was not acting out of impulsive rage but out of calculated desire. The evidence at each crime scene became increasingly chilling as investigators pieced together the puzzle. The sheer brutality and the methodical nature of the killings painted a portrait of a killer who thrived on power and control over his victims, leaving investigators to confront the terrifying reality of a serial predator hiding in plain sight. The killer's modus operandi. Striking in the outback, a hallmark of a serial killer's behavior is their consistency in how they choose and kill their victims. In the case of the backpacker murders, the killer exhibited a distinct modus operandi. Victims were often backpackers traveling alone or in pairs, and they were typically hitchhiking, a common practice for travelers in Australia. The killer preyed on their vulnerability, offering them rides and luring them to secluded areas where he could overpower them. Milat's choice of victims, young, inexperienced backpackers, was not random. It reflected a deep understanding of the area and its landscape, coupled with the knowledge that such isolated settings would provide ample opportunity to strike without being detected. Milat, as authorities later discovered, had a connection to the terrain. His knowledge of the land made him a ghost in the wilderness, able to elude authorities while his victims suffered unimaginable horrors. Police investigations. The early days of the hunt in the beginning, authorities struggled to make the connection between the various murders. The remote locations of the crime scenes and the lack of solid evidence caused many to treat the deaths as isolated, unrelated events. This initial lack of coordination between law enforcement agencies was a major hindrance, as police were unable to recognize the emerging pattern. The forensic clues that changed everything. The case broke open with the discovery of the body of German backpacker Anja Habschied in 1991. Her body showed signs of similar violence to previous victims, which allowed detectives to finally connect the dots. Forensic evidence, including hair and fibers, linked her death to the earlier killings. This was the turning point in the investigation. From this point on, police began to focus their efforts on identifying a suspect who was familiar with the outback and the backpacking lifestyle. Milat became a person of interest after it was discovered that he had been in the areas where some of the bodies had been found, and his criminal history raised red flags. This was the moment when the investigation started to gain real momentum. The rise of a suspect. Ivan Milat's connection. Ivan Milat, a 47-year-old man with a history of violence, was arrested in 1992. Milat had long been under suspicion, but It wasn't until investigators pieced together evidence from various sources that they were able to build a case against him. His connection to the area and his criminal background made him an obvious suspect. What made Milat particularly chilling was his ability to blend into society. He was a man who, on the surface, seemed normal, working in various blue-collar jobs, living a relatively mundane life, but beneath the facade he was capable of horrific acts. His arrest shocked many who had known him, as the man behind the killings was not some stranger or outsider, but someone who had quietly slipped through the cracks of society. The arrest and investigation. Milat's dark past, Milat's arrest, did not come as a complete surprise. His history of violence, including accusations of sexual assault and intimidation, painted a picture of someone who could easily be capable of the gruesome murders. In fact, the more investigators dug into his past, the more disturbing details emerged. Milat had a history of violent behavior dating back to his youth. He had been known for his temper and had a fascination with weapons. He was also an expert in the terrain of the outback, a trait that allowed him to commit these heinous acts with an almost predatory precision. The police found that he had been in the areas where many of the victims had last been seen. His dark past and knowledge of the land made him the perfect candidate for the role of the backpacker killer. The trial. Unraveling the mystery of Milat's actions. The trial of Ivan Milat captivated Australia and the world. As the evidence mounted against him, it became clear that he had committed a series of murders with chilling consistency. His methodical planning, the brutality of his actions, and the lack of remorse were all key factors in his conviction. For many, the trial also raised deeper questions about the nature of evil. How could someone like Milat, who blended in with everyday life, harbor such violent tendencies? The trial provided a window into the mind of a killer who was cold, calculating, and willing to take the lives of young travelers without remorse. The conviction. Milat's guilt. Established, Milat's conviction was a turning point in the case. After years of searching for answers, the authorities had finally captured the man responsible for the backpacker murders. In 1996, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His conviction brought a sense of justice to the families of the victims, but the horrors of the crimes lingered. For many, Milat's sentence was a bittersweet victory. While justice had been served, the victims' lives could never be replaced, and the psychological scars left on their families and the Australian public would remain forever. The legacy of the backpacker murders would continue to haunt those affected by the crimes for years to come. A legacy of fear. How the murders shaped Australian society. The backpacker murders had a profound effect on Australian society. The once open and welcoming outback, a place where travelers could roam freely, became a symbol of fear. The psychological impact on Australians was immense, and many people began to view the outback as a place of danger rather than adventure. For backpackers, it served as a chilling reminder that even the most beautiful places could hold the darkest of secrets. The murders altered the way people approached their travels in Australia, making them more cautious and aware of their surroundings. In a sense, Milat had not just stolen the lives of his victims, but he had also stolen the innocence of the Australian wilderness. Milat's prison years. A killer behind bars. In prison, Milat's behavior continued to be disturbing. He remained defiant and refused to admit guilt, even as the overwhelming evidence pointed to him as the murderer. His behavior was a reflection of his refusal to accept responsibility for his actions, and he continued to manipulate and control situations even behind bars. Milat's time in prison was marked by violent outbursts, and he often sought attention from the media, trying to maintain his notoriety. His inability to admit guilt and his continued attempts to control the narrative around his case demonstrated the level of narcissism and arrogance that had fueled his crimes. Theories and speculations. Did Milat have an accomplice? While Milat was convicted of 7 murders. Some speculated that he may have had an accomplice, or that there were other victims who had never been found. Some of the victims' bodies were discovered in areas that suggested the involvement of another person, and the level of organization and coordination in the killings raised questions. However, no concrete evidence has ever emerged to support the theory of an accomplice. Milat's sole responsibility for the murders has been firmly established, and investigators have closed the case on the idea of additional perpetrators. Nonetheless, the possibility remains in the minds of some, adding an extra layer of intrigue to the case. The continuing mystery. Other suspects and unsolved cases. Despite Milat's conviction, there are still lingering questions about whether he was the only killer operating during this time. Some investigators have suggested that Milat may have been involved in other unsolved murders or disappearances in Australia, and that the true scale of his crimes may never be fully known. The backpacker murders case remains a subject of debate and investigation, with some theorists wondering whether other killers might have been active in the same areas during the same period. This mystery continues to haunt both investigators and the public. Impact on law enforcement. Changes in police procedure. The backpacker murders had a lasting impact on law enforcement in Australia. The case highlighted the importance of using modern forensic techniques, such as DNA analysis and more sophisticated investigative tools, to track and capture serial killers. Police also began to rethink how they investigated murders in rural or remote areas, learning from the mistakes made during the initial stages of the backpacker murders case. In many ways, the case reshaped how law enforcement viewed serial crimes. The need for interagency cooperation and more modern approaches to crime solving became evident, leading to significant changes in policing techniques across Australia. The backpacker murders in popular culture. The story of the backpacker murders has become part of the fabric of Australian crime history. Documentaries, films, and books have been created to explore the case in greater detail, with many focusing on the psychological profile of Milat and the investigation into his crimes. In popular culture, the case has been used as a reference for how serial killers operate, and it continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly peaceful landscapes. The image of Milat as a cold, calculated killer is one that continues to haunt the collective imagination of the public. The backpacker murders stand as one of the darkest chapters in Australia's criminal history. While justice was eventually served, the deep psychological scars left by Milat's actions cannot be erased. The murders serve as a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk in the most unsuspecting places. Even today, the story of Ivan Milat remains a chilling part of the public's understanding of serial crime. As new generations of travelers continue to visit the Australian outback, they are reminded that, though the danger has passed, the specter of the backpacker murders remains an indelible part of the country's history. The discovery of the Belanglo. Forest mass grave in 1993. The discovery of a mass grave in Belanglo State Forest became one of the most harrowing moments in the investigation. When the police uncovered the remains of several victims in shallow graves, it was clear that the killer had not only been active for years, but had methodically hidden his victims in the heart of the Australian wilderness. The forest was dark, dense, and remote, an environment that made it almost impossible for anyone to stumble upon these bodies unless they knew exactly where to look. The gruesome nature of the find also hinted at the psychological profile of the killer. Belanglo Forest, known for its isolation, served as the perfect location for someone who wanted to conceal their crimes. The fact that the victims' bodies were often disposed of in such a clandestine manner suggested that the killer had a deep desire to remain undetected, a desire that would fuel his actions until his eventual capture. The mind of a killer. Milat's psychological profile. Understanding the mind of a serial killer can be both fascinating and terrifying. Ivan Milat's psychological profile was examined by experts who described him as having a personality marked by narcissism, an obsession with power, and a deep-seated hatred toward women. These traits manifested in the brutal way he hunted, controlled, and disposed of his victims. Milat appeared to enjoy the power dynamics between himself and his victims, and his violence was calculated and controlled. Moreover, Milat's seemingly ordinary life masked the monstrous tendencies beneath. He was a man who, despite being highly dysfunctional and violent, blended into society. His ability to keep up the facade of an average man in his community played a key role in his evasion of suspicion for so long. The psychology behind his ability to carry out such heinous acts while maintaining an outwardly normal persona continues to intrigue criminologists. Milat's family background. A troubled upbringing. Milat's troubled family background is crucial in understanding the possible factors that led him to become a serial killer. He grew up in a large, dysfunctional family with an abusive father. Milat's violent tendencies were evident early on, as he exhibited behavior that was marked by aggression, cruelty, and a lack of empathy. His upbringing did little to provide the emotional support and guidance needed for healthy psychological development. The Milat family was described by some as being a toxic environment, where cruelty and violence were normalized. Ivan's relationship with his siblings was marked by animosity, and his father's abusive behavior undoubtedly played a role in shaping Milat's worldview. Many experts believe that this environment, combined with Milat's inherent personality traits, contributed to his eventual violent actions. The role of media coverage. Sensationalism versus fact. The media coverage of the backpacker murders case was intense, and it played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of the crime spree. The Australian public was gripped by the sensational details of the murders, as the media painted a terrifying picture of a cold-blooded serial killer on the loose. The widespread media coverage created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia, where every backpacker was seen as a potential target. At the same time, however, the media also added layers of distortion to the case. Sensationalism often overshadowed fact, leading to false leads and misplaced public fears. The constant media coverage of Milat's crimes and trial made it easy for misconceptions to spread, as rumors and theories flooded the public discourse. In the end, while the media helped keep the case in the public eye, it also muddied the waters of true investigative work. Public fear and the impact on tourism. The backpacker murders had a direct impact on tourism in Australia, especially backpackers, who relied on hitchhiking and camping to explore the country. Australia had long been known for its open and free-spirited tourism culture, but after the murders, many travelers began to rethink their safety. Fear spread quickly across the backpacker community, with people rethinking their itineraries, questioning the safety of remote areas, and opting for safer, more tourist-friendly options. The Australian tourism industry was forced to make changes in response to the public outcry. Authorities started to issue safety warnings, advising travelers to avoid certain areas, particularly the outback and Belanglo State Forest. Tour operators. He also began to implement new security measures to ensure the safety of their guests, signaling a shift in how the country was perceived as a safe travel destination. The media's obsession with Milat. The notoriety of the backpacker killer. Milat's arrest and subsequent trial drew widespread media attention, turning him into a notorious figure in Australia's criminal history. This created a complex relationship between the public and the media, as many felt that the media's obsession with Milat's life and actions was unhealthy. While the public had a right to know about the investigation and trial, some argued that sensationalized portrayals of Milat's personality and background were distracting from the true nature of the crime. Milat, who was already narcissistic and attention-seeking, often relished the media spotlight, providing more fuel for the public's curiosity about him. His interviews and court appearances, in which he exhibited no remorse or empathy for his victims, only further cemented his reputation as one of the most frightening criminals in Australian history. The long road to justice. The emotional toll on families. For the families of the victims, the journey to justice was long and agonizing. Many parents and loved ones had to endure years of not knowing the fate of their children. The frustration of unanswered questions, combined with the pain of loss, created a cycle of grief and uncertainty. When the bodies of the victims were finally discovered, it brought closure to the families, but that closure came with the heavy weight of knowing the horrific details of their loved ones' final moments. For the families who had to endure the media frenzy and public speculation, the emotional toll was even greater. While some welcomed the media attention as a way to keep the case alive, others felt that their personal pain was being exploited for public consumption. In the end, the emotional scars left by the backpacker murders were not limited to the victims. Their families carried them for the rest of their lives. Milat's continued denial. The monster who would not admit guilt. Even after his conviction, Milat refused to take responsibility for his actions. He remained defiant, never showing any remorse for the murders he had committed. Throughout his trial and imprisonment, Milat maintained his innocence, a stance that bewildered both his prosecutors and the families of his victims. His complete refusal to admit guilt, despite the overwhelming evidence, highlighted his lack of empathy and inability to accept responsibility for the destruction he had caused. This denial added an extra layer of cruelty to his character. It wasn't just the murders themselves that made Milat terrifying. It was the cold, calculated manner in which he continued to live in denial, attempting to manipulate and control the narrative even after being caught. His actions left a trail of grief and suffering, but his refusal to acknowledge this only served to deepen the pain for those who had been affected by his crimes. The evolution of the case. New evidence and cold case investigations. Though Milat was convicted, the case continues to captivate investigators, journalists, and criminologists. With new advances in forensic science and investigative techniques, some believe there may still be additional evidence or connections that could shed light on the full scope of Milat's criminal activity. The ongoing fascination with the backpacker murders has led to a continued investigation into Milat's life and other potential crimes he may have committed. Although the case is officially closed, there is always a lingering curiosity. Was Milat responsible for other unsolved cases, and could there be more victims whose names have never been written in the history books? The unsolved victims. Other possible murders. Attributed to Milat as investigators comb through old cases. Questions arise about whether Milat was involved in other murders, particularly those of missing backpackers and travelers during the same time period. While Milat was convicted of 7 murders, there are still several other disappearances that remain unsolved, and some theorists suggest that these could have been Milat's victims as well. The mystery surrounding the true extent of Milat's crimes adds an unsettling layer to the case. Did Milat stop killing after his conviction, or was he merely the tip of a much larger iceberg of violence? This uncertainty will likely continue to haunt both law enforcement and the public for years to come. The backpacker murders' impact on serial killer profiling. The case of the backpacker murders had a lasting impact on the development of criminal profiling techniques. It was one of the first cases in Australia where the use of psychological profiling played a major role in narrowing down potential suspects. Milat's background and behavior closely matched the profile of a serial killer, and this helped investigators focus their efforts on finding a suspect who fit that profile. The case also demonstrated the limitations of early criminal profiling techniques, as it took investigators years to connect the dots and realize they were dealing with a serial killer. Nonetheless, the case provided key insights into the characteristics and behaviors of serial offenders, and it has since become a reference point in the study of criminal psychology and profiling. The Long Shadow of Ivan Milat. A monster in the outback. Even though Ivan Milat is now behind bars, his legacy looms large over the Australian outback. The backpacker murders remain one of the most infamous cases in the country's history, and the fear that accompanied Milat's reign of terror still lingers in the minds of many. Tourists, backpackers, and locals alike still remember the stories of Milat's horrifying crimes, and his name has become synonymous with the fear of the unknown dangers lurking in the vast wilderness. The psychological impact of his crimes has left scars not only on the victims' families, but also on Australian society as a whole. For many, the haunting image of the backpacker killer continues to define the dark side of Australia's outback, forever tainting the image of the country's wilderness as a place of adventure and freedom. Conclusion: a dark chapter in Australia's history. The backpacker murders are a dark chapter in Australia's history, one that has shaped the national consciousness and altered the way we think about crime in rural areas. Ivan Milat's gruesome actions and his chilling manipulation of his victims will never be forgotten. His case serves as a painful reminder of the evil that can exist behind an ordinary facade. While justice has been served, the emotional scars remain, both for the families of the victims and for the Australian public. The story of the backpacker murders continues to haunt us. A chilling tale of deception, brutality, and a man who lived a lie until the very end.
Imagine this. It's the dawn of the Cold War, a time when fear, suspicion, and espionage permeate every corner of the world. But what if, in the midst of this global tension, two ordinary American citizens were caught in the crossfire of history's most dangerous conflict? What if these two people were accused of one of the most heinous crimes, giving atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, putting the entire Western world at risk of nuclear annihilation? And what if those two people were you and your spouse, the Rosenbergs, the couple who changed history, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the very names that sparked a firestorm of controversy in the 1950s, would leave an indelible mark on the world, their trial reverberating through history, like a shot heard round the world. But were they guilty? And if so, what did they truly do? Was their execution in 1953 an act of justice, or a tragic miscarriage of it? This is the story that has fascinated generations, and the answer may surprise you. It's the early 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States, once the shining beacon of freedom and democracy, now finds itself locked in a deadly struggle with the Soviet Union for global dominance. At the heart of this tension lies the atom bomb, a terrifying new weapon of mass destruction that could obliterate entire cities in the blink of an eye. Before we dive into the gripping details of espionage, betrayal, and one of the most controversial trials in American history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the Cold War era. Drop a comment below. Do you think justice was served in the Rosenberg case, or was it a tragic mistake? Let's get in it. In 1945, the United States, led by President Truman, dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II. But this victory soon became a nightmare, as both the US and the USSR developed a deadly race to stockpile nuclear weapons. Spies, subterfuge, and secrets were the currency of the Cold War. Enter Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a seemingly average couple living in New York City. Julius, an electrical engineer, and Ethel, a secretary, had been involved with the American Communist Party for years. They lived modest lives, raising two sons, but their personal beliefs would soon entangle them in one of the most sensational espionage trials in American history. The beginnings of the case, the roots of the Rosenbergs case, lie in the years following World War II as tensions between the US and the Soviet Union escalated. The Rosenbergs, although not high-ranking members of the Communist Party, became entangled in a network of spies who were determined to share America's atomic secrets with the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Soviets successfully tested their own atomic bomb, catching the US by surprise. It wasn't long before intelligence agencies such as the FBI began suspecting that there was a mole inside the US government. The key question on everyone's mind: who gave the Soviets the secret to the bomb? In 1950, the FBI arrested Klaus Fuchs, a German-born British scientist who was working on the Manhattan Project during the war. Fuchs's confession to passing secrets to the Soviets sent shockwaves through American intelligence, and he named several individuals involved in espionage activities, including Julius Rosenberg. This revelation set off a cascade of investigations, leading to the eventual arrest of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in the summer of 1950. The investigation and arrest. The FBI's investigation into the Rosenbergs was swift and methodical. Julius had been working on classified projects, and his connections with known Soviet operatives raised suspicions. Evidence against him began to mount. Ethel, on the other hand, seemed to be an unwitting bystander. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that Ethel had been far more involved than originally thought. The couple's arrest was part of a larger crackdown on suspected communists in the US during the Red Scare. The McCarthy era was in full swing, and paranoia was rampant. The Rosenbergs were accused of conspiring to provide the Soviets with vital information about the atomic bomb, information that, if true, could tip the balance of the Cold War in favor of the USSR. In March 1951, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were brought to trial. The prosecution, led by attorney Roy Cohn, painted a damning picture of the couple as spies working to undermine America's national security. They claimed the Rosenbergs had given the Soviet Union detailed atomic bomb secrets that would allow them to build their own nuclear weapons. The defense, however, insisted that the Rosenbergs were innocent. They argued that the charges were based on flimsy evidence and circumstantial testimony. But as the trial wore on, the atmosphere was charged with ideological fervor. The prosecution focused on the Rosenbergs' communist affiliations and their connections to spies within the U.S. military and government. The most damning testimony came from David Greenglass, Ethel's brother, who claimed that he had provided Julius with atomic secrets while working at the Los Alamos laboratory. Greenglass testified that Ethel had typed up his notes, which were allegedly passed on to the Soviets. His testimony was later revealed to have been heavily influenced by the prosecution, and his motives were questioned as he hoped to avoid a lengthy prison sentence himself. Despite the weak evidence, the jury convicted Julius and Ethel of espionage. Julius was sentenced to death, and Ethel received the same fate, though she was considered by many to be a secondary participant. The Rosenbergs' fate would now rest in the hands of the courts and the public. The execution. On June 19, 1953, after a lengthy appeals process, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed by electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in New York. Their deaths were met with worldwide outrage and protests. To some, they were martyrs, innocent victims of the paranoid, anti-communist hysteria that gripped the U.S. at the time. To others, they were traitors who'd sold out their country for ideological reasons. In the years that followed, the case remained controversial. Many believed the Rosenbergs had been the victims of a flawed justice system, while others insisted they had committed treason by aiding the Soviet Union. Julius Rosenberg, the idealist or the traitor? Julius Rosenberg was, in many ways, a man of his time. A product of the Great Depression, he believed in the ideals of socialism and communism as a means to achieve justice for the working class. But was he driven by a deep ideological commitment to the Soviet cause, or was he merely swept up in the fervor of the time? Was he a passionate idealist or a cold-blooded traitor? Ethel Rosenberg, the innocent victim or the co-conspirator? Ethel Rosenberg's role in the case has been the subject of much debate. While her actions were certainly controversial, was she truly a willing participant in espionage, or was she an innocent bystander who was unfairly implicated? Was she executed for political reasons, or was there genuine evidence to convict her, the government, justice, or political agenda? From the perspective of the US government, the Rosenbergs were guilty of a grievous crime. The Soviet Union had been their enemy, and in the wake of the Cold War, they needed to send a strong message. But was the case about justice, or was it about politics? Did the government use the Rosenbergs as a symbol to scare the public and quell fears of communist infiltration? Public opinion, divided nation. The case divided America. Some saw the Rosenbergs as victims of a Cold War witch hunt, while others saw them as a dire threat to national security. The execution sparked protests, and people across the globe debated whether the Rosenbergs deserved their fate. Julius Rosenberg, the idealist who wasn't afraid of sacrifice. Julius Rosenberg was born in 1918 to Jewish immigrant parents in New York City. Like many others from poor immigrant backgrounds, he found himself deeply affected by the injustices of society, the poverty he witnessed, the class struggle, and the widespread oppression. From an early age, Julius gravitated toward ideals that promised a better world. The Communist Party, which advocated for the working class and criticized the capitalist structures of the US, became a natural outlet for his ideology. However, Julius's commitment was not merely intellectual. He became involved in more than just the party. He was an active participant in espionage. Julius wasn't just the intellectual, detached party member. He was someone who believed that his actions, selling atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, would not only end the Cold War, but also create a world that was more equitable for the working class. The idea of sacrifice was central to Julius's belief system. He truly believed that this ideological cause, even at the risk of his life, was worth it. In the face of rising tensions, when fear of communist infiltration was rampant, he refused to back down. Was it idealism that led him to pass secrets? Or was it a deep-seated belief that the survival of humanity depended on dismantling US dominance? The tragedy of Julius's character is that, while his actions were born out of a sense of duty and justice in his mind, they ultimately contributed to one of the darkest chapters in Cold War history. The painful irony is that while Julius felt that he was fighting for a just cause, the trial turned him into a martyr for both sides, those who opposed US imperialism and those who feared communist subversion. Emotionally compelling scene. Imagine Julius, sitting in a cold, dimly lit interrogation room, trying to explain to the FBI agents his vision for a better world. But with every word, he realizes that his vision will only lead to his execution. He still holds firm to his beliefs, but knows the price of standing up for them. Ethel Rosenberg. The innocent or the victim of politics? Ethel Rosenberg's role has always been contentious. Unlike Julius, there is less tangible evidence that she actively participated in espionage. She had no known expertise in atomic energy, nor did she have access to the critical secrets that her husband, Julius, allegedly passed to the Soviet Union. In fact, much of the evidence used to convict Ethel came from the testimony of her brother, David Greenglass, a key witness whose credibility was deeply questionable. David's testimony claimed that Ethel had typed out secret military documents that her husband had obtained. His description of the events, however, was inconsistent, and in the years following the trial, it became clear that his motivations were personal. He was trying to reduce his own sentence, hoping to spare himself the same fate as Julius and Ethel. It's possible that Ethel had no idea of the full scope of what Julius was involved in, but that didn't matter in the eyes of the prosecution. Ethel was in many ways a product of her time and circumstance. A mother caught in the wheels of a political machine. She had been a homemaker, a mother to two young sons, and by many accounts, a loving and caring wife. The question that lingered in the minds of many was she guilty? Or was she simply the victim of guilt by association? Emotionally compelling scene. Picture Ethel in the courtroom, sitting there, hands trembling as she holds onto a small locket containing pictures of her children. She's not guilty of espionage, yet she knows that her husband's fate is tied to hers. She wants to protect their sons from the nightmare that's unfolding. In her mind, the trial is not just for her life, but for the future of her children. David Greenglass, the betrayer or the man who wanted to live. David Greenglass, Ethel Rosenberg's brother, was the man whose testimony ultimately sealed their fate. A machinist who had worked at the Los Alamos laboratory, Greenglass confessed to providing Julius with military secrets related to the atomic bomb. In his testimony, he claimed that his sister Ethel had typed up the documents he gave to Julius. Yet the reliability of Greenglass's statements has always been under scrutiny. Was Greenglass simply trying to save himself from the death sentence, or was he motivated by a genuine sense of betrayal? In the cold light of history, we know that Greenglass's testimony was flawed. His own actions in the case suggest a man deeply conflicted about his role in the affair. Yet in 1951, in the tense climate of McCarthyism, it wasn't about seeking truth. It was about finding a scapegoat to preserve national security. Greenglass later admitted to lying about several key points in his testimony, especially regarding Ethel's involvement. His decision to point the finger at his sister, a mother and wife, was seen by many as a betrayal of the highest order. The Rosenbergs were executed, and Greenglass, though guilty himself, avoided the death penalty. Emotionally compelling scene. Picture Greenglass, sitting alone in his prison cell, his mind racked with guilt. He is haunted by the face of his sister Ethel, her innocent eyes looking at him for reassurance, and he realizes that his words, his lies, will lead to her death. The prosecution. Roy Cohn's crusade for justice. At the heart of the prosecution stood Roy Cohn, a young and ambitious lawyer who would go on to become infamous for his role as Senator Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel during the Red Scare. Cohn was a zealous prosecutor, driven not by the facts, but by an unwavering belief in the necessity of punishing those who threatened national security. In Cohn's eyes, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg weren't just spies. They were enemies of the state, willing to undermine the very foundation of American democracy. They had conspired to hand over atomic secrets to the Soviets, and for that, they needed to be eradicated. Yet, the prosecution's case was based on questionable evidence, and many of their witnesses had dubious motivations. The trial wasn't about delivering justice. It was about making an example of the Rosenbergs. The Cold War needed its martyrs, and the Rosenbergs would be just that. Emotionally compelling scene. Imagine Roy Cohn in the courtroom, standing with an air of righteous fury. He doesn't care about the evidence. All he sees is an ideological war that demands victory. His belief in the case is unwavering, even as cracks in his own argument begin to show. The public and media reaction. Divided America. The trial and execution of the Rosenbergs sent shockwaves through American society, deeply dividing public opinion. The 1950s were a time of intense paranoia. McCarthyism was rampant, and the fear of communism was at an all-time high. The U.S. government made an example of the Rosenbergs to show the world that America would not tolerate espionage or disloyalty. However, the global reaction was mixed. In the Soviet Union, the Rosenbergs were hailed as martyrs who had given their lives for the cause of peace and socialism. In Europe, where the Cold War was seen as an ideological battle for the future of the world. Many sympathized with the Rosenbergs and saw them as victims of an unjust trial. In contrast, many Americans saw them as traitors who had put their country's security at risk. Emotionally compelling scene. The execution of the Rosenbergs was broadcast across the world, and scenes of protests, some in the US and others internationally, added fuel to the fire. Families, civil rights groups, and intellectuals began speaking out against the trial, claiming that justice had not been served. The image of the Rosenbergs walking to their deaths became a symbol of the Cold War's human cost. The enduring legacy. Years after the Rosenbergs' execution, their case continued to haunt American history. New revelations, such as the declassification of Soviet archives, have painted a more nuanced picture of their involvement in espionage. While some argue they were guilty of passing secrets, others believe they were part of a larger systemic issue of espionage in the US. Was the execution justified? Did they deserve to die for their beliefs, or were they victims of a political climate that demanded sacrifices? The Rosenbergs' legacy, ultimately, is not just about their guilt or innocence, but about the lengths to which fear and suspicion can push a nation. Their case serves as a chilling reminder of how justice can be perverted when fear overrides reason, and how history often judges the events of the present with the clarity of hindsight. The final shot of the film cuts to a courtroom decades later, where an innocent man, like Julius, could be put on trial today, and the question looms: how far have we really come? The devoted revolutionary or the martyr for a flawed cause. Julius Rosenberg's commitment to communism, and by extension, his belief that the Soviet Union was the answer to the world's problems, made him a deeply divisive figure. Raised in the harsh realities of the Great Depression, Julius came to view the US as a country where the ruling class was exploiting the working class, and his ideological leanings were shaped by a fierce desire for equality and justice. But what sets Julius apart from many other spies is the deep contradiction in his beliefs. On one hand, he was a devoted revolutionary, fully committed to a cause that he saw as righteous, a cause he believed was necessary to avert nuclear war and create a more just world. On the other hand, his actions, specifically stealing atomic secrets from the US government and sharing them with a foreign power, had potentially catastrophic consequences for the very world he sought to protect. Picture Julius in a flashback, speaking passionately to a small group of fellow communists in a dingy apartment. He's a charismatic speaker, emphasizing the need to fight capitalist imperialism and describing his vision of a new world. His comrades listen in awe. The atmosphere is electric, and Julius's eyes burn with conviction. But then, in a moment of introspection, his face falters, as if he's already sensing the weight of the choices he's making. A subtle glance toward a family photo of his wife and children might reveal the personal stakes. He knows the path he's on could destroy everything he loves. The tragedy here is that Julius was not some cold-blooded traitor out for personal gain. He was a man who truly believed in the righteousness of his actions. In his mind, giving the Soviets the bomb was an act of solidarity with oppressed people everywhere, an attempt to level the playing field and stop the US from monopolizing nuclear weapons. However, as history would show, the consequences were far more complex, and, in his zeal for the cause, he underestimated how easily ideology could be manipulated. The silenced voice and the heart of the family Ethel. Rosenberg's role in the case is the most contentious. Some saw her as a passive participant, an innocent bystander caught in the web of her husband's actions, while others viewed her as a willing accomplice. The prosecution, with Roy Cohn at the helm, painted her as a key player, describing her as someone who had knowingly helped her husband transmit atomic secrets to the Soviets. Yet the evidence against her was weak, most notably her brother, David Greenglass's testimony, which was later discredited and revealed to be motivated by self-preservation. Emotionally compelling scene. Ethel is portrayed sitting quietly in a dark courtroom, her face pale, almost ghost-like. Her two young sons, Michael and Robert, are with her in the gallery, unaware of the gravity of what's unfolding. Ethel watches as her brother David, someone she's loved her entire life, gives his damning testimony. The weight of the accusation against her is unbearable. The weight of the injustice is palpable. For these protesters, the Rosenbergs had become symbols of everything wrong with the political climate of the time. The legacy, the price of ideology, justice, and sacrifice, decades after the Rosenbergs' execution. New revelations about the case continue to stir debate. Declassified Soviet documents have confirmed that Julius did indeed pass secrets to the Soviets, though the role Ethel played remains uncertain. Some argue that they were victims of a political agenda, sacrificed to the anti-communist fervor of the time. Others claim that they were guilty of espionage and paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. The case leaves us grappling with fundamental questions. What is the true cost of justice? How much do we trust the systems we rely on to uphold the law? In the case of the Rosenbergs, the answer remains elusive. Their execution serves as a stark reminder of how fear and suspicion can erode the very principles they seek to protect. Final scene. The camera zooms out from the historical footage of the Rosenbergs' execution to a modern courtroom, where an innocent man is being tried for espionage in an atmosphere of heightened suspicion. As the scene fades to black, the haunting question echoes. Have we learned the lessons of history?
February 9, 2004. A date etched in the annals of American crime, forever intertwined with the baffling disappearance of Maura Murray, a young woman, on the cusp of life's adventures, vanished without a trace. Her disappearance, a chilling enigma that continues to haunt investigators and amateur sleuths alike. Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, was last seen on a desolate stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. What began as a seemingly normal winter evening marred by a minor car accident quickly spiraled into a vortex of unanswered questions and unsettling possibilities. The mystery surrounding Maura's disappearance is not merely a case of a missing person, it is a chilling testament to the unknown that lurks in the shadows of our seemingly ordinary lives. The events of that fateful night have left an indelible mark on her family, the authorities, and the public consciousness, forever bound by the search for answers in the labyrinth of Maura's disappearance. Born in Hanson, Massachusetts, Maura Murray was a bright and athletic young woman, known for her infectious smile and determined spirit. She excelled in sports, particularly track and field, showcasing a drive and determination that set her apart from her peers. Her dedication to athletics was evident in every race she ran. Her academic achievements were equally impressive, earning her a place at the prestigious University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she pursued her dream of becoming a nurse. Maura's commitment to her studies was unwavering. Behind her infectious smile and outward success, Maura grappled with personal demons. She often found herself battling inner turmoil that few knew about. The pressure of her studies, coupled with a recent DUI incident and a strained relationship with her father, weighed heavily on her young shoulders. These challenges began to take a toll on her mental well-being. These internal struggles, while not uncommon for someone her age, became crucial points of interest in the aftermath of her disappearance. Her friends and family were left to piece together the puzzle of her life. Days before she vanished, Maura's life took a series of perplexing turns. She seemed to be preparing for something, though no one knew exactly what. She was involved in a minor car accident, damaging her father's car. This incident added to the mounting stress she was already under. The same day, she inexplicably emailed her professors, informing them of a family emergency that would require her absence from classes. This sudden and unexplained message left many puzzled. This sudden departure from her routine, coupled with her emotional state, raised red flags for those closest to her. Her friends and family were deeply concerned, sensing that something was terribly wrong. The days leading up to Maura's disappearance were marked by a string of peculiar events that have fueled countless theories and speculations. Friends and family noticed subtle changes in her behavior, adding to the mystery. On February 7, 2004, just 2 days before she vanished, Maura was involved in a minor car accident, damaging her father's car. Later that day, Maura visited her dorm room and packed a bag. She seemed to be preparing for something significant. Among the items she packed were printed directions to Burlington, Vermont, a detail that would become a focal point in the investigation. Why Burlington? What was drawing her there? What was Maura's purpose for traveling to Vermont? Was she meeting someone seeking refuge, or was it an escape plan? These questions remain unanswered, adding another layer to the intricate puzzle of her disappearance. Theories range from foul play to voluntary disappearance. On the evening of February 9, 2004, Maura left her dorm room, seemingly for good. Her departure was shrouded in secrecy. She withdrew cash from an ATM, packed her belongings, and left a note for her roommate claiming she was going home for a family emergency. This note raised more questions than it answered. This note, discovered after her disappearance, became a crucial piece of evidence, hinting at a planned departure rather than a spontaneous decision. It suggested premeditation. However, Maura never made it home. Her car was found abandoned, and she was never seen again, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Maura's journey took her north, along the winding roads of New England. At approximately 7:27 p.m., her car, a dark blue Saturn sedan, skidded off the road and collided with a snowbank on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. This seemingly minor accident marked the beginning of the end, the point where Maura's trail runs cold. A passing motorist, concerned for Maura's well-being, stopped to offer assistance. He reported seeing a young woman, visibly shaken but unharmed, inside the vehicle. The motorist, identified as Butch Atwood, offered to call the police, but Maura declined. Instead, she assured him that she had already called for roadside assistance. Minutes later, another couple driving past the scene noticed the car but saw no sign of Maura. They too stopped to check on the situation but found the car empty. The driver's side door was locked, the hazard lights were flashing, and the engine was still running, painting a picture of a hasty and unexplained departure. The vanishing of Maura Murray has spawned a myriad of theories, each attempting to piece together the fragments of a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Her disappearance has captivated the minds of many, leading to endless debates and discussions. Some believe Maura, overwhelmed by her personal struggles, chose to disappear voluntarily, seeking a fresh start far from the pressures of her life. They argue that her actions in the days leading up to her disappearance suggest a deliberate plan to leave everything behind. Others, pointing to her emotional state and recent DUI incident, suggest a tragic end, a possible suicide shrouded in the unforgiving wilderness of rural New Hampshire. The harsh and remote landscape could easily conceal such a fate. However, the lack of concrete evidence supporting either theory leaves a gaping hole in the narrative. The absence of definitive clues only deepens the mystery, leaving investigators and the public grasping at straws. The possibility of foul play, though officially downplayed by authorities, cannot be ignored. Some speculate that Maura may have encountered someone with malicious intent on that fateful night. The isolation of the location, coupled with the lack of witnesses and physical evidence, fuels speculation of abduction. The remote area where she vanished provides the perfect cover for such a scenario. Did a predator, lurking in the shadows, seize the opportunity presented by Maura's vulnerable state? The thought of an unknown assailant adds a chilling dimension to the case. Adding to the complexity are theories surrounding Maura's intended destination. Her plans and movements in the days before her disappearance remain a subject of intense scrutiny. Was she truly heading home to Massachusetts as she claimed? Or was her destination the picturesque Burlington, Vermont, as suggested by the printed directions found in her belongings? The uncertainty of her final destination only adds to the enigma. Despite the passage of time, the search for Maura Murray has never truly ceased. Law enforcement agencies, both local and federal, have dedicated countless hours to the investigation, meticulously pursuing leads and interviewing potential witnesses. The case, however, remains open, a testament to the frustrating lack of conclusive evidence. The initial search efforts, hampered by a delayed response and a lack of clarity surrounding the circumstances of Maura's disappearance, yielded little in the way of answers. Years later, the case gained renewed attention, fueled by the rise of true crime podcasts and online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. Amateur sleuths, armed with internet databases and social media platforms, have meticulously scrutinized every detail of Maura's case, proposing new theories and re-examining old ones. The disappearance of Maura Murray is not merely a cold case confined to dusty files, it is a living nightmare for her family, a constant ache that time has failed to heal. Her parents, siblings, and loved ones have endured years of agonizing uncertainty, clinging to hope while grappling with the possibility that they may never know what happened to their beloved Maura. The case, with its tantalizing details and haunting lack of closure, has captivated the nation. Maura's story has been featured on countless television shows, documentaries, and podcasts, each attempting to unravel the enigma of her disappearance. The public, fascinated by the mystery and driven by a desire for justice, have become armchair detectives, poring over evidence, debating theories, and keeping Maura's memory alive. The case, with its haunting details and enduring mystery, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of hope in the face of unimaginable loss. The digital age, with its double-edged sword of information and speculation, has played a pivotal role in shaping the narrative surrounding Maura Murray's disappearance. The case found a new life online, becoming a breeding ground for theories, conjecture, and fervent debate. Online forums and social media groups dedicated to solving Maura's case have emerged as digital town squares, where amateur sleuths from all walks of life convene to share information, analyze evidence, and propose new leads. While these online communities have been instrumental in keeping the case alive in the public consciousness, they have also contributed to the spread of misinformation and the amplification of unsubstantiated theories. The digital footprint Maura left behind, from her online activity to her final phone calls and emails, has been meticulously scrutinized by both investigators and amateur sleuths, adding layers of complexity to an already intricate case. The unsolved disappearance of Maura Murray stands as a chilling reminder of the mysteries that continue to baffle and haunt us. Did she choose to disappear, seeking a new life away from her troubles? Was she the victim of a tragic accident, or a sinister act of violence? The questions surrounding her fate linger, echoing through the years, a testament to the enduring power of an unsolved mystery. Maura's case serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring power of hope, and the relentless pursuit of truth, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The search for answers continues. Investigators remain committed to piecing together the puzzle, while her family and loved ones cling to the hope of finding closure. The case of Maura Murray, forever etched in the annals of true crime, stands as a haunting testament to the enduring power of an unsolved mystery.